Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders drop, and settle in wherever you are tonight. There is nothing here that asks anything of you, and nowhere else you need to be. Tonight we are going to follow one man through one ordinary day. Not a famous man, and not a remarkable day. He is a Benedictine monk of the 13th century, and his particular obedience within the house is the care of the sick and the keeping of the herbs. The brothers call him the infirmarian. We might call him the Abbey's herbalist. He rises in the dark hours long before dawn, and he will not lie down again until the last office of the night has been sung. And in the hours between he will walk the same stone passages perhaps 30 times, tend a garden, sit with the ill, weigh out a powder, feed a fire, copy a receipt, and answer a knock at the gate. We are going to stay with him for the whole of it. From the bell before dawn to the lamp he leaves burning in the infirmary when he finally goes up to bed. We will go hour by hour, office by office, because that is genuinely how his day was measured. There were no clocks as we know them. There was the sky, and there was a bell. And there were the 8 times each day that the bell called the whole community back into the church, and everything else in his life was fitted into the spaces between. Imagine, if you will, a stone abbey standing among low fields in the middle of England, or in Burgundy, or in the Rhineland. It hardly matters which. There is a church at the north side, a square cloister below it, a dormitory above the east range, a refectory to the south, and beyond all of that, on the sheltered eastern side where the morning sun falls first, a walled garden of small raised beds. The air smells of wet stone, wood smoke, and something green and faintly bitter from the drying loft above the warming room. This is where we will spend our night. There is no need to follow every word. Let your attention drift in and out as it pleases. We have a great many hours ahead of us, and a great many quiet ordinary tasks still to come, and none of them will mind in the least if you fall asleep partway through and miss the rest until morning. Let us begin, then, where his day begins, in the dark. He wakes because someone has come along the dormitory with a lantern and a small hand bell, and because the sound of that bell has been waking him at the same hour for so many years that his body has stopped waiting for it. It is somewhere in the region of 2 hours after midnight. The exact hour is not something he could give you, and it is not something he particularly needs. What matters is that the night is old and the morning is not yet near, and that the community is now required to be in church. The room he wakes in is long, low, and shared. It runs the whole length of the eastern range above the chapter house, and in most houses of this period, it holds every professed monk of the community, sleeping in rows on straw mattresses laid on wooden frames. There are no doors between them. Some houses have begun to divide the space with low wooden partitions, giving each brother a shallow bay of his own with a small window. But even where those exist, they do not reach the ceiling, and nothing that happens in the dormitory happens privately. A man who coughs all night is heard by 40 men. A man who weeps is heard too, and by an old and unspoken courtesy is not mentioned in the morning. He sleeps in his habit. This is not carelessness or hardship for its own sake. The rule that governs his whole life sets it down plainly in the chapter that deals with how the brothers are to sleep. They are to sleep clothed and girded with belts or cords, so that they may be ready without delay when the signal is given. The same chapter adds a small practical instruction that has always struck later readers as unexpectedly tender. The brothers are not to keep knives at their sides while they sleep, in case they injure themselves in the night as they turn, and a lamp is to burn in the room until morning, not for warmth, not for reading, simply so that no one lies awake in complete darkness, and so that the whole community can rise and move without groping. That lamp is the first light he sees every day of his adult life, a small clay or metal vessel with a floating wick set high on a bracket, giving off a light not much stronger than a single candle and a faint smell of hot oil. In midwinter it is the only light he will see for a long while yet. Let us turn now to the question of how anyone in this building knew what hour it was at all. This is one of the things that most surprises us when we look closely at monastic life. The community's entire day is divided with real precision into 8 offices at fixed points, and the timekeeping that supports it is done almost entirely without machinery. The mechanical clock does not appear in European monasteries until the very end of the 13th century, and even then it spread slowly. For our herbalist, the responsibility falls to the sacrist, or to a brother appointed under him, and the methods are a patient combination of several imperfect things used together. There is the candle, marked into bands, which burns down at a rate that is roughly known and can be roughly relied upon in still air. There is the water clock, a vessel that drips at a steady rate into a lower bowl, sometimes rigged so that a float rises and eventually trips a small weight onto a bell. There are the stars, a brother who has kept the night watch for 20 years knows exactly which star should be standing above which pinnacle of the church at the hour when the community must be roused. And in clear weather this is by far the most accurate method available to him. And underneath all of these, there is the simplest measure of all, the recitation of a fixed number of psalms at a known and unhurried pace, which gives a reliable stretch of elapsed time to anyone patient enough to count them. The result is a house that keeps time well but not perfectly. Records from several monasteries note nights when the community was called too early and stood in the dark church for far longer than intended, and nights when the watcher slept and the whole house woke late and hurried. Both happened. Neither was regarded as a catastrophe. The office was sung, and the day went on. We turn now to the stair he goes down. At the northern end of the dormitory, in almost every abbey of any size, there is a stone stair that leads directly down into the transept of the church. It is called the night stair, and it exists for exactly this hour, so that the community can pass from bed to choir without going outside, without unbarring any external door, and without walking through weather. It is one of the most quietly practical pieces of architecture in the whole building, and where such stairs survive today, the steps are often visibly hollowed in the center, worn down by the same 40 pair as a feet descending twice every night for 300 or 400 years. He goes down it in the dark, or near enough, following the line of shuffling shadows in front of him. The stone is cold underfoot through thin shoes. At the bottom the church opens out, enormous and unlit, except for a lamp burning before the altar, and whatever the brothers themselves have carried down. Their breath is visible from October until April. Let us turn now to the office itself, and to what he is actually doing for the next hour and more. The night office is the longest of the whole day. It carries several names depending on the house and the century: vigils, nocturnes, or matins, and the community will sing a substantial number of psalms. Listen to a series of readings and respond with sung refrains between them. In winter the arrangement is longer than in summer. The rule is exact about the number of psalms and the ordering of them, and every professed monk knows the entire Psalter by heart, all 150 psalms, because there is no practical way to read them by the light available. What books there are on the lectern are for the reader, and the reader stands where the lamp is. So the sound in that church at 2 in the morning is 40 or 60 men singing from memory, slowly, in unison, in a language they have used daily since childhood, in a building designed to hold the sound and give it back. It is not performance. Nobody is listening except themselves. It is, in the most literal sense available, work, and the brothers call it exactly that, the work of God, and it is the first and most important thing on the timetable of every single day. Our herbalist stands in his place in the choir, which is fixed by seniority and does not change. He sings the psalms he has sung 10,000 times, and because he is a human being, and this is the middle of the night, some part of his mind is elsewhere, running quietly over the list of things that will need doing when the sun comes up. We turn now to the small dishonesty of nodding off in choir, and how the house dealt with it. It happened constantly. The customaries of the great abbeys are full of instructions about it, which tells us plainly enough how ordinary it was, at Cluny and at houses that followed Cluniac usage. A brother was appointed to walk quietly around the choir during the night office carrying a small lantern, and where he found a monk asleep, he would set the lantern down in front of him. The sleeper, on waking, was expected to take up the lantern himself and continue the round until he in turn found another sleeper to hand it on to. It is a correction with a great deal of gentleness folded into it. No one is named, no one is shamed aloud in the dark, and the whole thing is over in a moment. Other houses used a light touch on the shoulder or a soft word. The point was never punishment. The point was that the office continued. Let us turn now to his hands, which tell you more about his particular obedience than anything else about him. Every monk in that choir wears the same habit and the same tonsure, and in the dark they are indistinguishable. But if you could take our man's hands, in yours you would know at once what he does. The nails are cut very short, and there is a dark stain worked permanently into the creases of the knuckles, the residue of years of bruising green leaf in a mortar. The pads of his fingers are hardened from stripping bark and from handling hot vessels without waiting for them to cool. There is a shine of old scar along one thumb where a knife slipped while he was splitting a root. And he carries a smell with him that never entirely washes off, a compound of bruised mint and wormwood and beeswax and the sharp vinegary edge of the oxymel jars. The other brothers know that smell. In a community where 40 men live at very close quarters for decades, everyone is known by small physical signatures of this kind, and his is the herb smell. A brother waking in the night with a griping pain in his stomach, feeling his way along the dark dormitory, could very nearly find the right bed by scent alone. We turn now to what he is quietly weighing up while the psalms go on. He has, in his head, a running account of the infirmary. There are 5 men in it at present. One is very old and is not going to leave it again. And everybody, including the old man himself, understands this perfectly well. One is a young monk in his 2nd year, who has been feverish for 4 days and whose fever has begun, cautiously, to break. One has a leg wound that is healing, but healing slowly, and must be looked at every single morning without fail. One is recovering from being blood 2 days ago, and is simply weak and hungry and bored. And one arrived yesterday evening, with a swollen face and a rotten tooth, and is in a great deal of pain, and will need something for it before the morning is much older. None of this is dramatic. None of it will be recorded anywhere. But it is what he is holding, and it is the reason that as the last psalm ends and the community begins to move, he does not go back up the night stair with the others. Let us turn now to the strange, useful interval that follows the night office, and to the door he goes to instead of his bed. In summer, when the nights are short, the gap between the night office and the office of Lauds at daybreak is very small, barely long enough to sit down. In winter, when the nights are long, the gap is considerable, sometimes as much as 2 hours. The rule and the customaries both take a clear view of what should happen in that interval. Brothers who need it should return to sleep. Brothers who wish to may read, or pray privately, or study, and in many houses the interval became the most reliably quiet reading time of the entire day, because nothing else was scheduled into it, and nobody was permitted to talk. Our herbalist does not usually read. He crosses the transept, goes out through a low door in the eastern wall, and walks along a stone passage with his lamp shielded against the draught to the infirmary. The infirmary of a well-built abbey is not a room off the cloister. It is a separate building with its own hall, its own small chapel, very often its own kitchen and its own garden, set a little apart from the main claustral square, so that the sick are not disturbed by the constant movement of the healthy, and so that the healthy are not obliged to walk through illness on their way to the refectory. To reach it he goes out of the enclosed square, along a covered walk, past the end of the herb garden, and in through a door that is never locked. The night attendant is awake, because the night attendant is always awake. In some houses this is a junior monk assigned in rotation, in others a lay servant employed for the purpose, and in a few it is an older brother who no longer sings the full night office, and has been given this instead. He has kept a small fire alive at one end of the hall, and a lamp burning at the other, and he has a report to give. We turn now to that report, which is the true beginning of the working day. It is delivered quietly, standing in the doorway, in a few short sentences. The young brother's fever broke somewhere in the night, and he has been sleeping since without shivering, and has sweated through the under-sheet twice. The old man did not sleep much, and asked twice what hour it was. The leg wound has not smelled worse. The one who was bled slept straight through, and woke asking for bread. And the man with the tooth has not slept at all, and is sitting up. There is a great deal contained in that handful of sentences, and our herbalist takes all of it in, without writing anything down, because there is nothing to write on, and no light to write by, and because he has been doing this for 18 years. Let us turn now to what he does with it. He goes first to the man with the tooth, because pain that keeps a man awake all night is the thing in this room most easily improved, and because he has something on the shelf for it, he does not attempt to pull the tooth. A monk of his period would generally not, both because the rule and later church legislation made monks uneasy about procedures that drew blood, and because the barber who visits the house periodically will do it far better and with the right instrument. What he does instead is fetch a small stoppered flask of clove and pellitory in wine. Warm it briefly in his hands, rather than over a flame, so as not to wake the others with the noise of the fire. Soak a scrap of clean linen in it, and have the man hold it against the gum. Then he sits with him for a while in the half-dark, saying almost nothing, until the worst of it dulls. That last part, the sitting, is not incidental to the work. It is a substantial fraction of it. A great deal of what an infirmarian did all day was simply being present in a room where someone was frightened. We turn now to the second bed, and to how he checks a fever without a thermometer. He does it with the back of his hand at the neck and forehead, with a look at the tongue and at the eyes, with a question about thirst, and with a finger laid at the wrist. Pulse-taking was well understood in his world. It had come west through the medical school at Salerno, and through the translations of Arabic and Greek medical writing that had been circulating for well over a century. And a competent infirmarian could describe a pulse as full or thin, fast or slow, even or stumbling, and would attach real meaning to the difference. He is also, in all likelihood, keeping an eye on the flask of urine that the attendant has set aside on the window ledge. Horoscopy, the inspection of urine by color and clarity, was one of the central diagnostic tools of medieval medicine, illustrated in charts of graduated flasks, and though much of what was read from it does not hold up today, a man who had looked at several thousand samples was genuinely noticing real things. The young brother's fever has broken. Our herbalist takes the damp under sheet away himself, replaces it, and tells the attendant to give him a thin barley water when he wakes and nothing heavier until the sun is properly up. Let us turn now to the walk back, and to the moment in the day that is arguably his favorite, though he would never say so, and would probably be uncomfortable being asked. The bell for Lauds goes as the sky in the east is turning from black to a deep and undecided grey. Lauds is the dawn office, and it is meant to be sung so that its close coincides with the coming of the light. This is not accidental scheduling. The whole office is built around the idea of daybreak, and its psalms and hymns return again and again to morning, to light, to waking. To get back to the church, he walks the length of the covered passage, with the open side facing the garden, and for those 30 or 40 paces, twice a day, the whole of his other work is laid out in front of him in the grey. The small raised beds, the stakes, the low wall with the bee skeps set into their niches, the pear tree at the far corner that was old when he entered the house, everything wet with dew, which is the state in which he most likes to see it, because dew on the leaf in the early hour was widely held to be the moment when a herb carried its greatest virtue, and because a man who has spent his life gathering things at dawn cannot look at a wet garden at first light without some part of him beginning to plan. He does not stop. The bell is going, but he looks. We turn now to Lauds itself, and to the way the building changes as the sun comes up. The church he walked into 3 hours ago was a black cave with a lamp in it. The church he walks into now is beginning, very slowly, to acquire edges. The high windows on the eastern side turn from nothing to grey to a pale watered gold, and as the office proceeds, the interior fills gradually with a light that no candle in the building could match. The carved capitals come out of the dark first, then the floor, then the faces opposite. By the end of the office, the brothers can see one another plainly, and a whole night has been crossed without anyone leaving the site. Anyone who has attended a dawn office in an old stone church will tell you that this is a physical experience rather than a devotional idea, and that it happens whether you have any faith in the words or none at all. The building was designed by people who knew exactly what they were doing with an eastern window. Let us turn now to the small practical matter of washing, which comes next, and which the customaries are surprisingly detailed about. Set into the wall of the cloister walk, usually on the side nearest the refectory, there is a laver. In some houses it is a long stone trough with a lead pipe running above it and a row of small spouts. In the grandest, it is a free-standing octagonal fountain house projecting into the garth under its own little roof, fed by a piped supply that the house has gone to enormous trouble and expense to bring in from a spring sometimes more than a mile away. The water is cold at every hour of every day of the year. Here the community washes hands and face after the night office and before the day's work, and here our herbalist washes rather more thoroughly than most, because he has just come from the infirmary, and because he is about to handle things that will go into other people's mouths. Whether he understood why this mattered in anything like modern terms is doubtful. That he did it consistently and by habit, and because his predecessor did it, is very likely indeed. A linen towel hangs on a roller beside the trove, and is changed twice a week by the chamberlain, and if it has not been changed on time, this is exactly the sort of thing that will be raised in chapter, which is, as it happens, where he is going next. Let us turn now to the office of Prime and to the meeting that follows it, which is where the shape of his working day is actually decided. Prime is short. It is sung shortly after full daylight, and after the long night office and the dawn office it feels almost brisk. When it ends, the community does not disperse. It walks out of the church, along the eastern cloister walk, and in through a wide doorway with 2 open windows flanking it into the chapter house. And every professed monk in the Abbey sits down. The chapter house is one of the finest rooms in any monastery, and often the most beautiful after the church itself. It is usually square or nearly so, vaulted, with a stone bench running unbroken around all 4 walls and a raised seat at the eastern end for the abbot. The floor is tiled. The acoustics are close and warm, quite unlike the church, because this is a room built for speaking rather than singing. Nowhere else in the enclosure is ordinary speech permitted so freely, and for many brothers this hour is the only time in the day when they will hear a full human conversation. The meeting takes its name from what opens it. A junior brother reads aloud a chapter of the Rule of Saint Benedict, working steadily through the whole text several times a year, so that no monk can ever claim not to have heard a provision recently. Before that, or just after it, comes the martyrology, the list of saints commemorated on the following day. Read in a steady voice from a lectern in the middle of the floor. Then the necrology, the names of the dead of the house and of houses connected to it, whose anniversaries fall today. Some of these names are 200 years old. They are still read. Let us turn now to the middle part of the meeting, which is the part that concerns our herbalist directly. After the reading, the abbot, or in his absence, the prior speaks. He may preach briefly, he may not. What follows is business, and it is conducted in a way that would be recognizable to anyone who has ever sat in a long committee meeting. Officers report. Requests are made. Permissions are granted or refused or deferred. Work is assigned for the day, particularly at harvest or in building seasons, when the whole community may be needed outside. The Abbey is run by officers, each holding what is called an obedience. There is the sacrist, responsible for the church, its fabric, its vessels, its lights and its bells. The cellarer, responsible for food, drink, stores, and a great deal of the Abbey's dealings with the outside world. The chamberlain, responsible for clothing, bedding, shoes, and the wash. The almoner, responsible for the poor at the gate. The precentor, responsible for the singing and very often for the books. The novice master, responsible for the young. And the infirmarian, responsible for the sick. And in most houses, by long custom, for the herbs that treat them. Our man has 3 things to raise this morning, and he has been arranging them in his head since he was standing at the laver. We turn now to the first of them, which is wine. The infirmary consumes wine steadily, and the infirmary does not grow any. Wine is used as a drink for the weak, as the base of a great many medicines, and as a wash for wounds. And in a house of this period, it is one of the few reliably clean liquids available. Getting it requires going to the cellarer, and the cellarer is understanding instruction from the rule itself to be careful and not wasteful, and takes that instruction seriously, and has an account roll to answer for at the end of the year. So the request is made politely, and with the reason attached, and it will very probably be granted, because the rule is unambiguous about the priority of the sick, but it will be granted at a specific quantity, and not an open one. The second request is for honey, which the Abbey does produce from the skeps along the garden wall, and which is therefore easier. The third is for a boy. He wants one of the lay servants for 2 mornings this week to help him lift and turn the old brother, who is heavy and cannot help himself, and to carry water. This kind of request appears again and again in monastic records, and it is a reminder that the infirmarian was very rarely working alone. In larger houses he had several servants under him, sometimes a paid attendant, sometimes a junior monk in training, and sometimes, in the best endowed abbeys, a physician retained from outside who visited and advised. We turn now to a document that tells us, in unusual detail, what kind of man the community expected him to be. Among the surviving English monastic observances, there is one from Barnwell, an Augustinian priory near Cambridge, which sets out the duties of each officer at length. Its passage on the infirmary is one of the warmest things in the whole text. He is to be gentle, good-tempered, kind, compassionate to the sick, and willing to gratify their needs with affectionate sympathy. He is to be patient with them when they are difficult, which the writer plainly expects them to be. He is to keep the infirmary and its vessels clean. He is to have ready at hand ginger, cinnamon, peony and other things of that kind, so that if a brother is taken ill, he can offer relief at once. He is to make sure the sick are washed and their beds changed, and that a candle and a lantern are ready in case anyone is dying in the night. That is a job description written by someone who had seen the work done badly as well. And the emphasis is striking. Almost none of it is about knowledge. Nearly all of it is about temperament. Let us turn now to the last part of the chapter meeting, which is uncomfortable, and which he sits through as everyone does. After the business comes the chapter of faults. Brothers accuse themselves aloud of their own lapses, coming late to the office, breaking a dish, speaking when they should not have spoken, damaging a tool through carelessness. Brothers may also, under a formal procedure, proclaim faults they have observed in others, though the rules around this are hedged about carefully to prevent it turning into a weapon. Penances are given by the abbot and are usually small: a psalm, a prostration, a period of eating apart. It is a strange institution to modern eyes, and it clearly caused real distress to some men. It also, in a community of 40 adults living together for life with no possibility of leaving, served an obvious purpose. Grievances that are aired weekly in a fixed and formal setting do not accumulate for 30 years. Every abbot who ever wrote about it says roughly the same thing, and every abbot who ever wrote about it also knew that the system was routinely misused by the small-minded. Our herbalist has nothing to declare this morning. He is thinking, mostly, about the leg wound. The meeting breaks up. Some brothers go to the scriptorium, some to the school, some to the fields with the granger, some to the workshops. There is a general movement of feet on tiles and a rising murmur of permitted conversation that will die away again within a few minutes once the community disperses, and our man walks out of the chapter house, turns east, and goes back to the infirmary for the round that is the real center of his working day. We turn now to the infirmary hall itself, in daylight this time, and to what is actually in it. It is a long room with a high roof, aisled in the larger houses, so that it looks a little like a small church, and in fact the resemblance is not accidental. At the eastern end, there is an altar and a small chapel space, positioned so that a man who cannot get out of bed can still see the Mass said and hear the words. The beds run down both long walls with their heads to the wall, spaced further apart than you might expect. There are shuttered windows set high enough that a lying man does not get a draught on his face. There is a fireplace, and in the better houses too, and the infirmary is one of the only rooms in the entire abbey apart from the kitchen and the warming room where a fire is permitted to burn all day through the winter. Each bed has a straw mattress, sometimes a feather one for the very ill, sheets of coarse linen, and blankets. In several houses there are curtains that can be drawn around a bed, mentioned in inventories, and used both for privacy and for keeping warmth close around a man who is shivering. There is a latrine reachable at the end of the hall. There is a store cupboard, locked, and our man carries the key on a cord at his belt, along with the key to the herb cellar. Let us turn now to what the rule says about this room, because it governs everything he does in it. The chapter of the rule that deals with the sick brethren opens with a sentence that every Benedictine infirmarian in Europe knew by heart. Before all things and above all things, care is to be taken of the sick, so that they are served as if they were Christ himself. It goes on to require that a separate room be set aside for them, and that an attendant be appointed who is God-fearing, diligent and careful. It permits the sick to bathe as often as is useful, where bathing is otherwise infrequent. It permits the eating of the flesh of four-footed animals to those who are very weak, in a community where this is otherwise forbidden. And then, having granted all of that, it turns around and adds a short paragraph in the other direction. The sick are not to distress those who serve them by unreasonable demands. They are to be borne with patiently, because greater merit comes of it. But the abbot is to take care that they are not neglected on the one hand, or indulged on the other. Those two paragraphs sitting side by side are, in miniature, the entire experience of running an infirmary in any century. Care for them absolutely, and do not let them run the place. We turn now to the round itself, bed by bed, which he does in the same order every morning. He starts nearest the door, with the brother recovering from bloodletting. This man is not ill. He was bled 2 days ago as part of the fixed rota that we will come to later this evening. And he is here because the custom of the house is that a bled brother rests in or near the infirmary for a few days afterwards on lighter duties and better food. He is bored, which our herbalist regards as a good sign and treats accordingly by giving him something to do. Today it is picking over a basket of dried chamomile heads and separating out the stalk, a task that requires no skill, takes a long time, and makes a man feel useful. This is not written in any medical text. It is the kind of thing an experienced infirmarian works out on his own within about 2 years. The second bed is the young monk whose fever broke in the night. In daylight he looks worse than he felt at 3 in the morning, hollow and grey and damp, which is entirely normal after 4 days of fever. Our man is pleased with him. He gives him a little thin ale rather than water, which was standard practice and rather safer than the water in most places, and a small piece of white bread, which in this house is a mild luxury reserved almost entirely for the sick. And he tells him plainly that he will feel unsteady for several days, and that this is expected and is not a sign of anything going wrong. Telling a frightened 20-year-old exactly what is going to happen to his body over the next week is one of the most effective things in the infirmarian's entire cupboard, and it costs nothing. Let us turn now to the third bed and to the wound, which is the piece of real medicine in the morning. The leg was cut open on a scythe blade at the end of the hay harvest. It is a long, clean wound down the outside of the calf, and it has been dressed every morning for 19 days. The dressing comes off slowly, and this is done slowly on purpose. Soaked loose with warm water rather than pulled, because our man has learned across 18 years what happens to a healing edge when you tear the cloth away. Underneath, the wound is closing from both ends toward the middle. He looks at the color of it, and at the skin around it, and at the amount and the smell of what has come away onto the cloth, and those 3 observations carry nearly all of the diagnosis. Redness spreading outward from the edge would worry him greatly. A sweet or foul smell would worry him more. Neither is present. He washes it with wine, not because he has any concept of what wine does to a bacterial population, but because wine has been the standard wound wash of European medicine since the Greeks, because he was taught to do it, and because in his own long experience wounds washed with wine do better than wounds washed with pond water. He then spreads on a salve made in his own stillroom from rendered fat, beeswax, and the pressed juice of plantain and yarrow, both of which grow within 40 paces of where he is standing, and he binds it with clean linen, and he props the leg on a folded blanket. The dressing that came off goes into a bucket to be boiled and used again, because linen is expensive and nothing in a medieval abbey is thrown away that can be cleaned instead. We turn now to the fourth bed, and to the man in it, and to the part of the work that no herb touches. The old brother has been in the infirmary continuously for 11 months. He entered the house at 15, and he is now somewhere past 80, which in his century is genuinely uncommon, and is a small, quiet marvel of the Abbey in itself. He cannot walk. He can sit up if he is helped. His mind comes and goes clear for a whole morning, and then not, and he sometimes speaks to people who died 40 years ago, as though they had just come in. There is no remedy for this, and our herbalist does not pretend otherwise. What he does instead is a list of very small things. He and the servant lift and turn the old man, and this is done several times a day. And it is done because the infirmarian has seen what happens to the skin of a man who is left lying in one position, and knows that once those sores open on a body that old they do not close again. He washes him. He combs what is left of his hair. He puts a warmed stone wrapped in cloth at his feet, because the old are cold in a way the young cannot quite believe. He asks him every single morning the same 3 or 4 questions, not because the answers change, but because being asked is the point. And when the old man is clear, which he is this morning, our herbalist sits on the edge of the bed for a while and lets him talk about the Abbey as it was 60 years ago, when the western range had a thatched roof and the pear tree in the herb garden was a sapling that a prior everyone has now forgotten put in with his own hands. Let us turn now to the last bed and to the end of the round. The man with the tooth has fallen asleep at last, sitting half upright against a bolster, which is exactly what our herbalist hoped for. He does not wake him. He leaves the flask on the ledge beside him with a fresh scrap of linen, tells the servant to let him sleep as long as he will, and makes a mental note to speak to the porter about when the barber is next expected in the district. Then he goes down the hall, opening the shutters one after another, because the morning has warmed enough to allow it, and because he holds, as most infirmarians of his century did in some form, that stale air standing in a sick room was itself part of what made men ill. He was working from a theory of corrupted air that we no longer accept in its own terms. He was also, by opening the windows of a room containing 5 sick men every morning of his life, doing something quietly sensible. At the door he stops and looks back down the length of the hall at 5 men in various stages of being unwell in a stone building on a wet morning 700 and some years ago. And then the bell goes for terce, and he goes. Let us turn now to terce and to the door in the wall that he goes through afterwards. Terce is the 3rd hour of the day, sung at what we would call the middle of the morning. Like prime it is short, 3 psalms, a hymn, a reading, a prayer, over in perhaps a quarter of an hour. In many houses it is followed directly by the daily community mass, and on Sundays and feast days by a procession around the cloister. The community assembles, sings, and goes out again, and the whole morning is stitched together by these small regular interruptions in a way that a modern working person would find either maddening or restful, depending entirely on temperament. When it ends, our herbalist walks out of the church, along the eastern walk, past the infirmary door without going in, and through a low arched gateway, in a stone wall into the herb garden. And this is where, if you asked him privately which part of the Abbey was his, he would point. We turn now to what a monastic garden actually was, because it was not one garden but 3 or 4, kept quite separate and used for entirely different things. There was the kitchen garden, the hortus, which fed the community. Cabbages, leeks, onions, garlic, beans, peas, beets, parsnips, all of it in long open beds, worked by lay brothers and servants, under the direction of the cellarer or the gardener, and none of it his responsibility, except where a plant sat in both worlds at once, which several of them did. There was the orchard, which in a great many abbeys occupied the same ground as the monks' cemetery, so that apple and pear trees stood in rows over the graves of the brothers. This was quite deliberate, and nobody found it grim. It was regarded as fitting. The dead lay under a growing thing that fruited every year. There was, in the larger and later houses, a small pleasure garden or green court, with turf and a fountain and perhaps a vine kept for walking in. And then there was the herbularius, the Physic garden, small, walled close to the infirmary, and organized on a completely different principle from any of the others. The kitchen garden is laid out for volume. The Physic garden is laid out for identification. Let us turn now to what that means in practice, and to the 16 beds. We have an unusually clear picture of this because of a single remarkable document. Around the year 820, someone at the Abbey of Reichenau drew up an idealized plan of a monastery on 5 sheets of parchment sewn together and sent it to the abbot of St. Gall in what is now Switzerland, where it has remained ever since. It is not a picture of a building that was ever put up. It is a plan of what a well-ordered abbey ought to contain, and it is the single most detailed piece of evidence we have for how these places were meant to work. On that plan, on the eastern side, there is the infirmary. Beside it there is a house for the physician, with a room for the dangerously ill, and a store for the medicines. There is a separate small building for bloodletting, and directly next to the physician's house, there is a rectangle divided into 16 narrow beds, each one labeled with the name of a single plant. 16 beds, 16 plants, one kind in each. That is the whole principle. A bed of a single herb, edged with boards or woven wattle to hold the soil a little above the path, with room to walk on both sides, and nothing else growing in it. You do not need a label if a bed contains only one plant. And more to the point, a novice being taught cannot make the single most dangerous mistake in the craft, which is picking the wrong leaf. We turn now to the 16 names themselves, because the list survives, and because it tells us exactly what a Carolingian monastery thought a sick community would need. The first 2 beds are lilies and roses. Both are there for medicine, and not for decoration, whatever else they may also have given. The lily root, boiled soft and mashed, was the standard poultice for boils, swellings and burns across the whole of medieval Europe, and the rose was so central to the pharmacy that a well-stocked house kept it in half a dozen forms at once: dried petals, rose water, rose honey, rose oil, and a conserve made by pounding fresh petals with sugar or honey, then a bed of climbing beans, which surprises modern readers until you remember that in a garden this small every bed also has to justify itself as food. Then savoury, warm and peppery, given for wind and a griping stomach. Then costmary, tall and silvery, whose long leaves were laid in books and given for the stomach and the liver. Then fenugreek, whose seeds were ground and made into a soft warm paste for swellings and for chest complaints. Then rosemary, for the head, for the memory, for the joints, and burned in the sick room to sweeten the air. Then mint, in the general sense, for the stomach and for the mouth. Then sage, which carried a reputation almost embarrassing in its breadth, gargled for a sore throat, drunk for sweating, chewed to clean the teeth, and around which a whole family of proverbs grew up about why anyone in whose garden it grew should ever be permitted to die. Then rue, bitter and blue-green, for the eyes and against poison, and treated with a certain wariness because its sap blisters skin in the sun. Then flag iris, grown for the dried root, which was ground for coughs and used to scent both linen and powders. Then pennyroyal, small and pungent and used with real caution, chiefly for stomach cramps and for the aches of a monthly cycle, which tells us that these plant lists were not written for men alone, even where they were kept by them. Then watermint. Then cumin, whose seeds went into both medicine and bread. Then lovage, tall as a man by August, its root dried for the digestion and its stalks perfuming the pot. And last, fennel, which was among the most used plants in the whole of European medicine, seed and root and leaf, given for the eyes, for the stomach, for nursing mothers, and chewed by fasting monks on long feast days for reasons the texts do not spell out and probably did not need to. Let us turn now to the two other lists that stand behind his garden, both of which he half knows and neither of which he has ever seen. The first is older. About the year 795, the administration of Charlemagne issued a long ordinance on the management of the royal estates, and near the end of it there is a list of the plants that every estate is instructed to grow. It runs to some 70 or more herbs and vegetables and a further set of fruit and nut trees, and it is astonishingly complete. Lily, rose, fenugreek, cosmary, sage, rue, cumin, rosemary, mint and fennel are all there, along with poppy, mallow, mustard, coriander, dill, chervil, tansy, wormwood, and a great deal else. That single administrative document did more to standardize the European garden than any medical text ever written, because it was not advice. It was an instruction to landholders, and it was obeyed. The second is a poem. In the 840s, Walafrid Strabo, abbot of Reichenau, wrote a short work on the cultivation of gardens, describing 23 plants in his own small plot and what he did with each. It is the earliest gardening writing of its kind in the Latin West, and what makes it beloved is not its botany, but its honesty. He opens by describing the state of the ground when he began, choked with nettles, the soil packed hard, and himself going at it with a mattock, and his own hands dragging the roots out. and then having to protect the new seedlings from a downpour by carrying water in his cupped palms and shading them with boards. Any person who has ever started a garden recognizes that paragraph immediately. Our herbalist has never read either document. He does not need to. Both of them have come down to him, already dissolved into the practice of his house, in the shape of the beds, in the choice of what is in them, and in the voice of the old brother who taught him, who was taught by another old brother, who was taught by another. We turn now to the work itself, which is where the morning actually goes. There is a persistent and rather charming picture of the monastic herbalist drifting between beds with a basket over his arm, snipping thoughtfully. The truth is a good deal more like ordinary hard gardening, and it occupies several hours of most days, from March to October. He begins with the weeding, because he always begins with the weeding. A raised bed of a single herb is only useful if it stays a bed of a single herb. And the ground around a monastery is generous to exactly the plants he does not want. Chickweed and groundsel come up in the cool of spring in numbers that have to be seen to be credited. Couch grass runs in from the path edges underground and has to be forked out whole, because any length of white root left behind will simply start again. Bindweed climbs the lovage, and a certain amount of what he pulls out is not really a weed at all, but a useful plant in the wrong bed, self-sown from somewhere else, which he shakes the soil off and carries to the correct place rather than throwing away. It is done kneeling on a folded sack, and it is slow, and it is one of the very few tasks in his whole day that leaves his mind entirely free. Several monastic writers say something to this effect about garden work, that it occupies the hands and releases the head, and that a man who has spent an hour weeding is easier to talk to afterwards. We turn now to the tools leaning against the wall by the gate, which are fewer than you might expect. A spade, wooden bladed and shod along its cutting edge with a strip of iron, because a holy iron blade is expensive and heavier than a man wants at the end of a long afternoon. A mattock for breaking hard ground. A hoe. A dibber, which is simply a shaped stick with a point, for making holes to set seedlings into. A curved hook for cutting. A besom of birch twigs for the paths. Baskets, many baskets of every size, all of them made on the Abbey's own land. And a wheelbarrow, which is a comparatively new arrival in Europe in his century, and which is regarded by everyone who uses one as an excellent idea. The iron parts go to the Abbey smithy to be sharpened, and are wiped with an oiled rag before they are put away, because the rules instruction about the Cellarer treating the vessels of the house as sacred vessels was taken by a good many brothers to apply to their own tools as well, and because a rusted blade is twice the work. Let us turn now to everything else that wants this garden. Birds take newly sown seed, and the answer is a covering of twigs laid over the bed, and, at the worst season, a boy with a wooden clapper who is paid in bread. Slugs come out after warm rain and go straight for anything young and soft. Moles heave the beds up from below, and are the one enemy against which he has no reliable answer at all. Hares get through a gap in the wall about twice a year, and do a remarkable amount of damage in a single night. The Abbey's own hens, if a gate is left open, are worse than the hares. And then there are the brothers. A monk walking past on his way to the infirmary, who pulls a sprig of mint to chew, or a handful of parsley, or picks the flower heads off the chamomile because they smell pleasant, does very little harm on any single occasion and a great deal of harm over a summer. He has raised this in chapter twice in 18 years. It made no difference either time. Let us turn now to water and to the vessel he carries it in. The garden is watered by hand from a well or a cistern or a channel led in from the same supply that feeds the laver, and it is carried in a pot. The medieval watering pot is a lovely object and a genuinely clever one. It is a fat earthenware jar with a narrow neck at the top and a base pierced with a great many small holes. You lower it into the water, let it fill through the holes, then place your thumb firmly over the hole in the neck. The vacuum holds the water in. You carry it to the bed, lift your thumb, and it rains gently out of the base. Put your thumb back and it stops. Every seedling bed in that garden has been watered with one of these. Thumb on, thumb off, 1,000 times a summer. Fragments of them turn up regularly on monastic excavations, and they are so simple and so satisfying that the design survived essentially unchanged for 600 years. We turn now to the soil and to where its richness came from. There are stables, there is a byre, there are pigs, and there is a community of 40 men. All of it is composted, turned, rotted down, and dug back in, and the monastic garden was one of the most carefully manured pieces of ground in medieval Europe, simply because everything the house produced stayed on the site. Ash from the kitchen and the bakehouse went on too. Spent brewing grains went to the pigs and came back around. Nothing left. He digs a bed over in autumn and lets the frost break it up. He forks compost into the top few inches in spring rather than burying it deep. He knows, without any theory to explain it, that the bed by the south wall drains too fast and needs more rotted matter, and that the bed in the north corner sits wet and will kill rosemary in a bad winter, and he has planted accordingly. And every one of those judgments came from watching a plant die there once. Let us turn now to seed and to the quiet responsibility that comes with it. The Abbey does not buy seed if it can avoid it. In late summer he lets a portion of each bed run past its useful stage and go over entirely to flower and then to seed, which looks untidy and which a visiting brother once complained about in chapter. The seed heads are cut when they are dry and brittle, and never when they are damp. They are rubbed out over a cloth, winnowed by tipping from one bowl to another in a light breeze, so the chaff blows off, and put into small linen bags or clay pots with a slip of parchment inside naming the plant and the year. That year matters. Some seed is good for 4 or 5 years. Some is barely good for 1. Parsley, angelica and lovage lose their strength quickly, and a man who sows 3-year-old angelica seed will get almost nothing and will have lost a whole growing season finding out. So the older bags are used first and the newest are kept back, and this modest, unexciting piece of housekeeping is one of the things that separates a garden that works from a garden that limps. We turn now to the wall and to what lives in it. The garden wall is not simply an enclosure. It is a piece of equipment. It breaks the wind, which matters more than most people expect. And it holds the sun's heat through the afternoon and gives it back at night, so that the strip of ground within a couple of feet of a south-facing wall is measurably kinder than the middle of the garden. That is where the rosemary goes and the sage, and anything else with southern habits that resents a hard frost. Set into the sunny face of the wall, at about chest height, are several arched recesses, and in each one stands a straw skep with bees in it. Every abbey needed bees urgently, and for two quite separate reasons. Honey was the only sweetener the house had in quantity, and it was the base of half his medicines, and wax was needed for candles, and the church would not use tallow on the altar. So the bees were tended seriously, and the skeps were sheltered in their niches from rain and wind, and our herbalist keeps an eye on them, without being the brother formally responsible for them. He also, on a warm morning like this one, likes standing near them. The sound of a working hive at 10 in the morning in June is one of the steadiest sounds in the world. Let us turn now to the same garden seen across the whole turning year. Because the morning we are describing is a morning in early summer, and it is only one of 4 quite different mornings he has here. In spring the garden is nearly all preparation, and almost no harvest. Beds are forked over, edges are relayed, seed goes in, and the whole place looks like bare brown ground with string lines across it. This is the anxious part of the year, because the previous year's dried stock is running low in the loft, and the new year's has not begun. In summer it is gathering, and gathering, and gathering. Leaves are taken before the plant flowers, when the old teaching held their virtue was highest, and flowers on the day they open, and everything is carried in and hung before it wilts. This is the busiest stretch of his year, and it runs from May into September, without a real pause. In autumn the work goes underground. Roots are lifted after the top growth has died back, and the plant's strength has drawn down into them, which is why he digs elecampane and comfrey and lovage in October and not in June. Seed is collected, beds are cut down and cleared. The loft above the warming room fills, and in winter there is very nearly nothing to do out here at all, and he comes anyway, once a day, in the frost, to look. There is almost no rational purpose to that walk. He has never missed it. Let us turn now to the bell for sext, and to the meal that follows it, which is the first food he has had since yesterday. Sext is sung at the 6th hour, the middle of the day. It is short, like terce, and in the summer half of the year, when the community eats twice, it is followed almost directly by dinner. He washes his hands at the laver again, which is required of everyone before entering the refectory, and goes in with the rest. The refectory is the second great room of the abbey after the church, and in a well-built house it is a long hall with a high timbered roof, running along the southern side of the cloister, so that it is as far as possible from the choir and the noise of the offices. The tables stand along the walls with the brothers seated on one side only, all of them facing inward, so that the middle of the floor stays clear. The abbot's table is on a low dais at the far end, and set into the thickness of one wall, there is a small stone pulpit, reached by a narrow stair, with a lectern in it, because somebody is going to be reading aloud for the entire meal. We turn now to that reader, and to the silence he speaks into. The rule is unambiguous. There is to be no talking at table. One brother reads for the whole of the meal, from scripture or from the lives of the saints, or from an approved commentary, and everyone else eats and listens. The reader takes the duty for a week at a time, and because he cannot eat while he is reading, he is given his own meal afterwards. with a little extra, so that the office does not fall on him as a penance. Before he begins, he asks the community's prayers, and the brothers answer him, and that short exchange is very often the only sentence spoken aloud in that room all day. There is a further instruction that has always struck me as revealing. No one is to ask a question about what is being read, and no one is to comment on it, even approvingly. The prohibition exists because the moment one man is permitted to say something admiring about the reading, the meal becomes a conversation, and once it becomes a conversation, it will never be a silence again. Let us turn now to how 40 men eat together in silence and still manage to ask for the salt. They use their hands. Over the 9th and 10th centuries, the great houses developed lists of formal signs, and by our herbalist's day, these lists ran to several hundred entries and were taught to novices as part of their basic formation. The surviving lists from Cluny and from English houses are among the most quietly delightful documents of the whole monastic tradition, because they are so specific, and because the specificity tells you what people actually wanted at table. For bread, the thumbs and forefingers of both hands are joined to make a round, because bread was baked round. For fish, the hand is moved flat through the air like a tail in water. For milk, the little finger is drawn across the lips in imitation of a suckling child. For honey, the tongue touches the fingers. For eels, the two hands are held as though gripping something that is trying to get away. There are signs for the abbot, for the cellarer, for the infirmary, for a book, for a candle, for cold, for more, and for enough. There are also, inevitably, complaints in the customaries that the sign language had grown too elaborate, and that brothers were using it to hold entire conversations, including gossip, in complete silence, which was very obviously against the spirit of the thing. The complaints did not stop it. We turn now to what is actually on the table. Bread, first and always. The rule allows about a pound of it per man per day. It is dense, coarse, and dark, made from whatever the Abbey's own mills produced, wheat mixed with rye, or barley depending on the year and the region. White bread exists in the house, but it is set aside almost entirely for the sick and for guests. Then 2 cooked dishes, which is the exact provision of the rule, on the sensible reasoning that if a brother cannot eat one of them, he will be able to eat the other. In practice, this means a thick pottage of beans, or peas cooked with herbs and a little fat, and something alongside it, salt fish on many days, eggs, cheese, occasionally a dish of vegetables cooked in their own right, fresh fruit or raw vegetables where the season provides, though the medical thinking of the period was suspicious of raw fruit, and it was often cooked instead, and drink. The rule permits about half a pint of wine a day, where wine is the local drink, while noting with a rather dry sigh that the writer would prefer monks did not drink at all, but that persuading them of this in his own age was hopeless. In the north, Ol replaces it, brewed in the Abbey's own brewhouse weak, and drunk in quantity, because it was safer than water and because the day's work required calories. Let us turn now to the one thing that is not on that table, and to the room where it is. The rule forbids the flesh of 4-footed animals to all the brothers except the sick and the weak. Birds sit in an interesting grey area that houses interpreted differently. Fish was never counted as flesh at all, but red meat, plainly and specifically, is not eaten in the refectory. It is eaten in the infirmary. Because the very same chapter of the rule that forbids it to the healthy permits it to the ill, and the infirmarian is the man who decides who is ill. That single sentence explains an enormous amount about the internal politics of a medieval monastery, and it explains why, in house after house across the 12th and 13th centuries, we find abbots and reformers writing exasperated letters about the number of brothers who have discovered themselves to be too weak for the refectory. Over time, many houses built a second dining room, the misericorde, where meat could be eaten by those excused from the common table, and the rota of who ate there became one of the standing minor controversies of monastic life for 300 years. Our herbalist is not naive about this. He knows perfectly well which two brothers in this house have a talent for feeling unwell in the week the pork is salted. He also knows that a man of 60 who has eaten beans for 40 years and is beginning to fail genuinely does better on broth made with meat, and that the rule was written by someone who understood that too. We turn now to the infirmary kitchen, which is a real and separate thing. The well-appointed abbey has a second kitchen serving the infirmary alone, with its own hearth, its own pots, and often its own cook. It exists because the sick eat at different hours from the community, because they eat different food, and because a man who needs a warm caudle at 3 in the morning cannot be served from a kitchen that banked its fire at 7. What comes out of it is not what we would think of as hospital food. It is closer to a set of remedies that happen to be edible. There is chicken broth, long simmered, skimmed, and given warm, which appears in medical texts across the whole medieval period and every subsequent one. There is barley water, made by boiling barley and straining it, cooling and thin and very easy on a stomach that has kept nothing down for 2 days. There is almond milk, made by pounding blanched almonds with water and straining, which was enormously important because it kept better than dairy in a warm kitchen, and because it was permitted on fast days when milk was not. There is gruel. There are possets and caudles, warm drinks of ale or wine thickened with egg and sweetened with honey and spiced, given to anyone weak, cold, or recovering. And there is white bread and a small quantity of wine, and, when the infirmarian judges it needed, meat. Let us turn now to the thinking behind all of that, because it is not simply kindness. It is a whole system, and he learned it as one. Medieval medicine inherited from the Greeks and from the Arabic writers who preserved and extended them a model of the body built on 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, each associated with a pairing of qualities, hot or cold and wet or dry. Health was balance. Illness was excess or deficiency of one of them, and every single thing a person ate, drank, breathed, or did could be classified by the same qualities and used to push the balance back. Around this sat a scheme called the 6 non-naturals, and this is the part that governs his kitchen. The 6 were the air a person breathed, food and drink, sleep and waking, motion and rest, what the body took in and what it put out, and the passions of the mind. Every one of them was regarded as a lever the physician could adjust, which means that when our herbalist opens the shutters, tells a frightened novice exactly what will happen to him over the next week, insists that a man who has been bled rests for 3 days, gives an old man a warm drink at midnight, and sets a board convalescent to sorting chamomile heads. He is not doing 6 unrelated small kindnesses. He is working through a list he was taught, in order, and he would name it if you asked him. A great deal of medieval medicine does not survive contact with the modern world. That particular framework, air, diet, sleep, movement, the workings of the body, and the state of the mind, has aged remarkably well. We turn now to the end of the meal, and to where he goes with the rest of the afternoon. The reading stops. Grace is said. The community rises and files out, and there is a stretch of the early afternoon in which, in the summer season, the rule expects the brothers to rest, because they have been awake since the middle of the night. Some sleep, some read. In a strict house they lie down in the dormitory, in silence for an hour. Our herbalist, more often than not, climbs a stair instead. Let us turn now to the loft above the warming room, which is the least visited and most important room in his working life. Along the eastern range, below the dormitory, and near the chapter house, there is a room called the Refectory, the warming house. It contains the only fire in the whole claustral range that burns freely through the winter, and the brothers are permitted to come to it at certain hours to thaw their hands, which after 4 hours in an unheated stone church is not a luxury. That fire has a chimney, and the chimney passes up through the room above, and the room above is therefore dry, gently warm, and slightly draughty, which is the exact combination that herbs require. So that is where his drying loft is, not by accident. Every well-run abbey put it there, or somewhere very like it. We turn now to what drying actually involves, because it is the single skill that separates a working herbalist from a man who merely knows plant names. The principle is simple, and the execution is not. You are trying to remove the water from the plant fast enough that it does not rot, and slowly enough and coolly enough that you do not drive off the volatile oils that are the reason you picked it. Heat is the enemy as much as damp. A bunch of mint dried too near a fire smells of hay. A bunch dried too slowly in a cold, wet corner goes black at the center of the bundle and is thrown out. Leafy herbs are cut with a good length of stalk, gathered into bundles no thicker than a wrist, and hung upside down from cords strung across the roof beams. No thicker than a wrist. That measure appears again and again in later stillroom books, and it is one of those pieces of practical knowledge that must have been arrived at the hard way. By opening one fat bundle after another and finding the middle spoiled. They hang out of the direct sun because light bleaches the color, and the color is one of the ways he judges quality. They hang with space between them because air has to move. And they hang high, which is partly about warmth rising and mostly about mice. Let us turn now to the flowers and the roots, which are handled quite differently. Flowers are not bundled. They are picked over, the stems and green parts removed, and spread in a single loose layer on frames of stretched linen or on woven wicker trays, and turned gently with the fingers once a day so that they dry evenly and do not stick to one another. Calendula petals, chamomile heads, rose petals, elderflower, lime blossom, all of them go onto trays. A flower dried in a bundle is a flower that goes brown. Roots are the heaviest work of the year. They come out of the ground in autumn caked in soil and have to be washed properly, which means water, a brush, and a great deal of cold hands. Then they are trimmed of their fine hairs and the thick ones are split lengthways or sliced across, because a whole comfrey or elecampane root, left entire, will simply not dry through before it spoils. The slices go onto trays or are threaded on string like beads and hung. A well-dried root should snap cleanly. If it bends, it goes back up. And seeds are the easiest of all. They are already nearly dry when he takes them, and they only need finishing, rubbing out over a cloth and left thinly spread for a few days before bagging. We turn now to the enemies of that room, of which there are 4. The first is damp, which arrives in a wet autumn and turns the whole loft heavy, and against which his only weapons are the fire below, the open shutter, and patience. The second is mould, which is what damp becomes if he loses. He checks the bundles by putting his face into them, which sounds unhygienic, and is in fact the correct and only test available, because mould announces itself by smell long before it shows. The third is insects. Small beetles get into dried seed and into stored root, and can hollow out a whole jar without disturbing the surface. Bay leaves, wormwood and southernwood were laid among stores against them, and southernwood earned its country name of muth herb honestly. And the fourth is mice, which is a permanent and losing war, and which brings a certain animal into the story, who we will properly meet this evening. Let us turn now to the labels, and to a problem that most modern accounts skate over entirely. The infirmarian can read. His assistants very often cannot. So the labeling system in that loft has to work for both, and it does by being redundant. There are slips of parchment or scraps of thin board tied to the bundles with the name written on them in Latin. There is also, in many houses, a system of position, so that the same herb hangs in the same place, along the same beam every single year, and a man who cannot read a word can still be sent to fetch the third bundle from the north end. And there is thread, collared thread, or thread tied in a particular number of knots, wound around the stalks at the top of the bundle. That last method turns up in enough scattered references, and in enough later rural practice that we can be fairly confident it was widespread. It is also, quietly, a reminder of who was doing most of the actual carrying and fetching in these buildings, and that a great deal of monastic and household medicine ran on the hands of people who left no writing behind at all. We turn now to the jars, the bags, and the question of how long any of this keeps. Dried leaf goes into linen bags, which breathe, and into wooden boxes and lidded baskets. Roots and seeds go into glazed earthenware jars with a cloth, or a stopper of wax cloth over the mouth, and into small pots of the kind an apothecary would call a gallipot. Glass exists, but is expensive, precious and used mainly for waters, and for the flasks of the sick room rather than for bulk storage. As for how long, the working rule in his head is roughly this. Leaf and flower are good for a year and no more, and by the following summer they will have faded in color and lost most of their smell, which for him is the same statement twice. Root and seed will hold 2 years and sometimes 3. Anything preserved in honey, or in oil, or in strong wine will keep longer than the raw plant it came from, which is a large part of why so much of his craft consists of putting plants into honey, oil and wine. Which means that every summer, when the new gathering starts to come in, there is a morning when he takes down what is left of last year's leaf, carries it downstairs, and puts it on the fire, not because it has spoiled, because it is a year old, and the new is on the way, and a shelf full of last year's chamomile is a shelf that cannot hold this year's. He has been told, more than once, that he does this too readily. He does it anyway. Let us turn now, down the stair again, to the room where all of that dried plant material becomes medicine. It is on the ground floor, close to the infirmary and close to a fire, and depending on the house and the century it may be called the stillroom, the apothecary's room, or simply the herb house. It has a stone floor that can be swilled with water, a long bench under a window on the north side, so that the light is even and does not swing about through the day. Shelves from floor to ceiling on the inner wall, and a small hearth with a trivet, and a chafing dish for work that needs gentle heat. This is the room where he spends the most concentrated hours of his week, and it smells stronger than anywhere else in the Abbey. We turn now to what is on that bench, because the tools of this craft changed remarkably little for a very long time. The mortar is the heart of it, and there is more than one. There is a large one of stone or marble, heavy enough that it does not walk across the bench when it is used hard, kept for roots and barks and anything that has to be broken rather than bruised. There is a smaller one of bronze, which rings when it is struck and is disliked by anyone trying to sleep nearby, used for seeds and for hard resins. And there is a wooden one, or one of glazed earthenware, kept for delicate leaves and flowers, and for anything that must not pick up a taste of metal. A careful herbalist does not use his root mortar for rose petals, and he does not need a book to tell him why. Alongside them lie the pestles, a horn or wooden spatula for lifting salve out of a pan without scouring it, sieves of stretched horsehair in 2 or 3 grades of fineness, strainer cloths of loose woven linen, a funnel, a shallow copper pan, a small brass ladle, and a marble slab kept smooth and clean for rolling out pastes. And at the end of the bench, in a wooden case, the balance. Let us turn now to that balance and to the weights beside it, because weighing is where this work becomes serious. The scales are a simple beam with 2 pans hanging from cords, and the weights are small discs or squares of brass in a graded set. The system is the one that would be used by apothecaries in Europe for the next 600 years. The smallest useful unit is the grain, notionally the weight of a single grain of barley from the middle of the ear. 20 grains make a scruple. 3 scruples make a dram. 8 drams make an ounce. And 12 ounces, not 16, make the apothecary's pound, which is a different pound from the one the cellarer uses for flour, a fact that has confused people continuously since the day it was invented. He weighs anything strong. He does not weigh chamomile, and nobody ever did. But if he is putting poppy or henbane into anything at all, he weighs it twice, and he does it in daylight. And he does it when he has not been up since 2 in the morning, if he can possibly arrange it. We turn now to the honest difficulty at the center of his whole trade, which he is aware of and cannot solve. He can weigh the dried plant to a grain. He cannot know what is in it. 2 roots of the same species, one grown on the dry bed by the south wall in a hot summer, and one grown in the wet north corner in a cold one, are simply not the same medicine, and every good herbalist in history has known this, and none of them before the modern era could measure it. So the craft compensates with caution. Start low. Increase slowly. Watch the person in front of you rather than the recipe. prefer a weaker preparation, given often to a stronger one given once. That is why so many medieval doses are described in language that sounds vague and is actually rather practical. As much as will lie on a penny, a piece the bigness of a bean, a draught the quantity of an eggshell. These are not sloppiness. They are the units available to a man handing something to another man in a room with no laboratory in it. Let us turn now to the preparations themselves, one at a time, because this is the substance of the craft. The simplest is the infusion. Hot water is poured over dried leaf or flower and left covered to stand, and then strained. Covered, because the fragrant part is the volatile part, and it leaves with the steam if you let it. This is what he makes for camomile, mint, lemon balm, elderflower, and for most of what he gives to the merely uncomfortable. Then the decoction, which is for the hard parts of a plant. Roots, barks, and seeds are simmered in water rather than steeped, sometimes for a long time, and sometimes reduced deliberately to half the volume, because you cannot persuade a comfrey root to give up anything by pouring hot water on it and walking away. Decoctions are stronger, darker, more bitter, and do not keep. He makes them fresh. Then, the syrup, which is how anything is made to keep, and to be swallowed by a person who does not want it. The infusion or decoction is combined with honey, or with sugar in a wealthy house, and boiled down until it thickens. Sugar was still a rare and costly import in his century, and was itself classed as a medicine rather than a food. A well-made syrup keeps for months, tastes tolerable, and can be given by the spoon to a child or to a very sick adult who could not manage a cupful of anything. Then the oxymel, which is honey and vinegar boiled together, sometimes with herbs steeped in it. It sounds unpleasant, and it is genuinely refreshing. It keeps extremely well, and it was one of the great standbys of the medieval sick room, particularly for coughs and for fevers, where thirst was the main complaint. We turn now to the preparations that do not involve water at all. There is the infused oil. Fresh or wilted herb is packed into a jar, covered with oil, and stood in a warm place for weeks, on the window ledge in summer or near the chimney breast in winter, and then strained. Calendula, St. John's wort, and comfrey were all treated this way, and the resulting oils were used directly on the skin or carried on into salves. The salve, or unguent, is that oil melted together with beeswax until it sets to the right firmness, and it is a matter of proportion and of testing. He drips a little onto a cold tile, waits, and pushes it with a fingernail. Too hard, and it will not spread on a wound. Too soft, and it runs off a warm limb and into the bedding. This test, dripping onto a cold surface, is still exactly how the same preparation is judged today. The plaster is a stiffer version of the same idea, spread on cloth and applied to a limb, and the poultice is its warm and messy cousin, made by mashing fresh herb or bran or linseed with hot water into a paste, wrapping it in cloth, and laying it hot on a swelling. We turn now to the dry preparations, which fill most of the shelf. Powders are simply dried plant ground fine and passed through the horsehair sieve, and they are the most flexible thing on the bench, because a powder can be stirred into wine, mixed into honey, blown into a throat through a quill, or dusted onto a sore. The electuary is a powder worked into honey or syrup until it is the consistency of a thick paste, and it is given by the spoonful. It was one of the commonest forms of medicine in his world for the simple reason that it made bitter powders swallowable and stored for a year. The pill is the same paste rolled thin on the marble slab and cut into pieces, sometimes rolled in a little flour or in gold leaf in the households where that sort of thing happened, and the conserve is a fresh flower, most often rose or violet, pounded with sugar or honey and stored, which preserves something of the taste of the living plant into February, and which was given as much for the pleasure of it as for anything else. Let us turn now to the shelf at the back, which is kept apart from the others. There are perhaps 8 things in his stock that could kill someone. Poppy, from which he makes syrups and which he treats with real respect. Henbane, hemlock. Mandrake root, which is genuinely dangerous and which carried such a thick coat of folklore around it that separating the plant from the story is difficult even now. A little bryony. Foxglove in some regions, though it was used more cautiously and less confidently than later centuries would use it. These live at the back or in a locked box, and in a well-ordered house the infirmarian is the only person who touches them. He does not send an assistant for anything on that shelf. We turn now to the sleeping draught, which is the most delicate thing he ever makes. The medical tradition he inherited had a genuine and serious interest in producing insensibility, both for the relief of pain and to allow a surgeon to work. From the school at Salerno and from the great southern Italian house at Monte Cassino comes the recipe for the soporific sponge, a sea sponge steeped in a decoction of opium, mandrake, henbane and other things, dried, and then moistened again with hot water and held under the patient's nose. Whether it worked reliably is very much debated, and the honest answer is that it sometimes worked and sometimes did nothing, and occasionally did far too much. In England and Northern Europe, a related preparation appears in recipe collections under the name Dwale, a drink combining opium and henbane and hemlock juice with gall and vinegar and other ingredients in wine, with instructions for waking the sleeper afterwards by washing his temples with vinegar and salt. Our herbalist knows a simplified version of this. He makes it very rarely, he makes it weak, and he sits with anyone he gives it to. There is a line in his head, and it is not written down anywhere, which is that a man who wakes up in pain is a man he can still help. Let us turn now to the book he works from, and to the fact that it is partly his own. Somewhere on the shelf there is a volume, not beautiful, not illuminated, written in several hands. Part of it was copied out of a standard collection 2 generations ago. Part of it was added by his predecessor. Part of it is his. And the parts that are his are the interesting parts, because they are not recipes so much as corrections. Beside an inherited receipt for a cough syrup, there is a note that the quantity of honey given here is too great and that it should be reduced by 1/3. Beside another, there is a note simply saying that this was tried twice and did nothing. Working books of this kind survive from monastic and household collections across Europe, and the marginal notes in them are, for the historian, worth more than the recipes. They are the sound of somebody thinking. We turn now to the afternoon bell, and to a duty that comes round on a fixed calendar and takes the rest of the day. Because today is a bleeding day, let us turn now to what that meant, and to the small building at the edge of the site where it happened. The practice was called minutio, the diminishing, and in English houses the brothers used the word Seyney, from the Latin for lessening the blood. It rests on the humoral theory we touched on at dinner. Blood was understood to accumulate, to grow thick or corrupt, and to require periodic reduction in a healthy body, just as a fire requires the ash to be raked out of it. This was not something done only to the ill. It was done to everyone on a schedule as maintenance. That plan of the ideal abbey drawn at Reichenau includes a building for it, set beside the physician's house and the infirmary. A separate structure, heated, with beds in it. Not a corner of a room, a building. We turn now to the calendar itself. Different houses kept different rotas, and the surviving customaries give us numbers ranging from 4 times a year to 7, or even more. A common English pattern ran to about 4 or 5, spaced through the year and arranged carefully around the great feasts and the fasts, because a community weakened by bleeding could not be sent straight into Lent, and because nobody wanted a quarter of the choir sitting down during the Easter liturgy, nor was the community bled all at once. They went in small groups, a few brothers at a time over successive days, so that the offices could still be sung properly, and the house could still function. Managing that rota was the infirmarian's business, and it required him to know who had been bled recently, who was excused, who was too old, who was ill, and who had a duty in the coming week that could not be missed. Let us turn now to who held the blade. In the earlier centuries the monks did it themselves, and a senior brother with a steady hand and long practice would open a vein as competently as anyone. Over the 12th century this changed. A series of church councils grew increasingly firm that monks and canons should not be engaged in the practice of medicine for gain outside the cloister, and later legislation made clergy in major orders uneasy about procedures involving cutting and cautery. The practical outcome was that most houses came to rely on a barber, either one retained by the abbey or one who came out from the nearest town on the appointed days. So on a bleeding day, there is a man in the Seyney house who is not a monk, working steadily through the brothers, and our herbalist is beside him. And their relationship is one of the more interesting working partnerships in the whole abbey. The barber has the hand and the instrument. The infirmarian has the knowledge of the men. We turn now to the procedure, described plainly and without drama. The brother sits. A band is tied around the upper arm until the veins at the inside of the elbow stand up. He is given a staff or a rolled cloth to grip, which raises the vein further. The barber opens it with a small blade, a lancet or a spring-loaded fleam, at a shallow angle across rather than along the vein. The blood runs into a shallow bowl held below. The quantity is judged by eye and by the man, and it is generally rather less than popular imagination supposes, though enough to leave most people lightheaded. The band is released. A pad of linen is pressed on. The arm is bound, and the brother is helped to sit for a while before he stands. Because a proportion of men faint, and everybody in the room knows it, let us turn now to the sky, which had a vote in all of this. There were rules about when not to bleed, and they were taken seriously by educated practitioners. The dominant scheme held that each sign of the zodiac governed a region of the body, from the head at the top of the list down to the feet at the bottom, and that one should not open a vein in a part of the body while the moon was standing in the sign that ruled it. diagrams of a human figure surrounded by the 12 signs, showing which governed which limb, were copied into medical manuscripts, into psalters, and later into books of hours, and they are among the most frequently reproduced images of the entire medieval period. Alongside the zodiac figure there were vein men, diagrams showing which vein to open for which complaint, with a startling number of options: a vein at the temple for the head, one under the tongue, one at the ankle, and there were bleeding calendars, tables setting out the good and bad days of each month. Our herbalist takes a moderate view of all this, as many practical men did. He notes the moon. He will move a bleeding by a day if the sign is badly wrong, and there is no reason to hurry. He will not move it by a week. We turn now to the part of a bleeding day that the brothers actually cared about. After being bled, a monk was given several days of rest. The number varies by house, commonly 3, sometimes 4. During those days he did not do manual work. He was excused parts of the night office so that he could sleep. He ate better food, meat among it, and he was given wine, and in many houses he was permitted to talk, to walk in the open air, and to sit together with the other bled brothers away from the ordinary routine. The result, entirely predictably, is that being bled became something to look forward to. The records make this very plain. There are complaints from reforming abbots about the Seyney days turning into a small holiday, about brothers lingering in the infirmary longer than the rota allowed, about excessive eating and excessive talk, and about young monks asking to be bled more often than was good for them. Some houses had to write rules restricting it. Let us turn now to how we should think about all of that from where we now stand. Bleeding a healthy person is not good for them, and the theory that recommended it was mistaken. That is simply true, and there is no use dressing it up. But it is worth noticing what else was in the package, because a medieval monk who was bled 4 times a year was also 4 times a year taken off heavy work, allowed a full night's sleep, fed better than usual, given company and conversation, and told firmly to rest. For a man living an austere, laborious, sleep-interrupted life, that may well have been the most beneficial part of the whole institution, and the blood in the bowl may have been the price of admission. Our herbalist would not have put it that way. But he notices, because he has been doing this for 18 years, that the brothers who go back to work too quickly after a bleeding are the ones who fall ill in the following month. And so he keeps them longer and argues with the prior about it when he has to, and wins about half the time. The bowl is emptied. The barber wipes his blade and packs it, and the bell goes for none. Let us turn now to none and to the hour that follows it, which is the only hour of his day spent sitting down with a pen. None is the 9th hour, the middle of the afternoon, and it is another of the short offices. When it is over, the community scatters again, and our herbalist goes to the north walk of the cloister, where the light is best. We turn now to that walk, and to why it is where the writing happens. In most abbeys, the scriptorium is not a separate room at all, or not at first. It is the northern arcade of the cloister, the side that runs along the wall of the church, and it is chosen for one reason only. It faces south into the open square of the garth, and it therefore receives light for the whole of the day without the sun ever coming round to shine directly into a scribe's eyes. Along that walk, in the better appointed houses, are carrels, small wooden study booths built into the arcade, each with a sloping desk, and just enough room for one man and his materials. There is no artificial light. There will never be artificial light. An open flame in a room containing several hundred sheets of parchment and a quantity of oak gall ink is a risk that no sacrist in Europe was willing to take, and the customaries are strict about it. Writing therefore begins when it is bright enough and stops when it is not, which in December means an afternoon of perhaps 2 usable hours, and in June means the scribes are turned out by the bell long before the light fails. Let us turn now to the materials on that sloping desk. The parchment is made from the skin of sheep or calf, soaked in lime, scraped, stretched on a frame, dried under tension, and scraped again until it is thin and even. It is expensive, it is durable, and it is reusable, because a leaf can be scraped back and written over again, which is how a number of older texts have come down to us only as ghostly underwriting beneath something more recent. Before a word goes on it, the sheet is prepared. Small holes are pricked down the outer margins with a spiked wheel or an awl, and lines are ruled between them with a hard point or with a lead plummet, so that the writing runs level. The margins are measured out. All of this is done before any ink appears, and a well-ruled page is half of a good page. The ink is made from oak galls, the hard brown swellings that appear on oak twigs where a wasp has laid its egg, crushed and steeped in water or wine, then combined with iron salts and thickened with gum. It goes onto the page pale and darkens as it oxidizes, which is why a fresh line of medieval ink looked weaker than the line above it, and why scribes learned to trust that it would come right within the hour. Red ink, for headings and initials, is a separate pot, and in a working manuscript of the kind our herbalist uses, it is not decoration. It is navigation. The name of each plant stands in red so that a man in a hurry can find it. The quill is cut from the flight feather of a goose, hardened, and trimmed to a chisel point with a small knife that the scribe keeps in his left hand throughout, because he will need to recut the nib every few lines, and because the same knife holds the springy parchment flat. We turn now to the books he is working from, because this is the closest thing his century has to a library of pharmacy. The oldest and the greatest is the work of Dioscorides, a Greek physician who served with the Roman armies in the 1st century and who compiled a description of some 600 medicinal plants and other substances, with their appearance, their habitats, their preparation and their uses. It circulated continuously for over 1500 years, in Greek, in Latin, in Arabic, and it is not an exaggeration to say that a great deal of what our herbalist believes about plants can be traced back through a chain of copies to that one man walking about the eastern Mediterranean with a notebook. Beside it there is the herbarium attributed to Apuleius, a late antique compilation that travelled all over Europe, was translated into Old English early, and gave generations of northern readers their basic plant list. There is a verse herbal, known by the name of Mesa, describing the virtues of several dozen plants in Latin hexameters. It exists in verse for a simple reason. Verse is easier to memorize than prose. And a monk who has the properties of wormwood in meter carries them about with him for the rest of his life without needing the book at all. Our herbalist can recite a good deal of it, and does quietly while he is weeding. And then there is the newer material, which is why the 13th century is a more interesting time to be doing this work than the 10th. Let us turn now to the books that arrived from the south. In the later 11th century, a man remembered as Constantine the African came to the Abbey of Monte Cassino and spent his last years translating medical works from Arabic into Latin. What he brought with him was not simply a set of new remedies. It was a whole systematic medicine, the accumulated and organized learning of the Greek tradition as it had been preserved, corrected and greatly extended in the Islamic world, and its arrival transformed European medical teaching within 2 generations. Out of the medical school at Salerno, in the 12th century, came a set of practical handbooks that spread everywhere. There is a treatise on simple medicines, known from its opening words as Circa Instans, which lists individual substances alphabetically with their qualities and uses, and became the standard working reference of the Western apothecary for 300 years. There is a book of compound medicines under the name of Nicholas, which gave standardized recipes for the great mixtures. And there is a poem on healthy living, addressed to an English king in some versions, full of brisk practical verses about sleep, wine, exercise and diet, which was copied and translated and quoted for centuries because it was short, sensible, and easy to remember. Not every abbey had all of these, and a modest house in the countryside would have had a handful of them at best, often as extracts copied into a larger volume of miscellaneous useful matter, rather than as complete books. But the material was moving, and it moved through exactly this kind of afternoon, one man copying a page at a time. We turn now to a problem that anybody who has ever looked at an early herbal notices at once. The pictures are frequently useless. They begin as reasonable drawings from life. But a picture in a manuscript is reproduced by being copied by hand, and the man copying it is usually a scribe rather than a botanist, and he is copying not from the plant but from another picture, which was itself copied from another. Over 10 or 20 generations of this, the leaves become symmetrical in a way no real leaf ever is. The roots turn into decorative curls, the proportions drift, and what began as a recognizable plant becomes a beautiful and entirely abstract ornament. There are famous cases where an illustration and its caption have parted company so completely that the picture shows one species and the name belongs to another. Practicing herbalists knew this perfectly well. They did not identify plants from pictures. They identified plants from other people in the field by being shown. The manuscript told you what to do with a plant once you had it, and the old brother in the garden told you which one it was, and those were understood to be 2 separate kinds of knowledge with very different levels of reliability. It is worth saying that this began to change in his own century, and the one after it. A gradual return to drawing from the living plant produced illustrated herbals of genuine botanical accuracy, and the change is visible on the page. But for most of the medieval period, the safest thing in an herbal was the text. Let us turn now to a related difficulty, which is names. A single plant might be known by a classical Latin name, a different medieval Latin name, a Greek name transliterated, an Arabic name transliterated twice with error at each stage, and 3 or 4 local names in the vernacular that varied between one valley and the next. Compilers responded by writing synonym lists, long columns matching names across languages. And these lists are among the most practically important and least glamorous documents in the whole tradition. They also failed regularly. A recipe copied out of a southern book might call for a plant that does not grow north of the Alps at all, and a northern herbalist reading it would substitute whatever he believed the name referred to locally. Sometimes the substitution was sensible. Sometimes it produced a remedy with no relationship whatever to the original. Our herbalist's response to all of this is the small book he is writing today. It is not a copy of anything. It is a working list of what actually grows in his garden and his hedgerows, under the names his own house uses, with a cross-reference to the names in the borrowed volume beside him, so that the next man to hold this obedience does not spend 2 years discovering the same mismatches he did. We turn now to how the books were kept and lent, because this house is careful about it. The volumes live in a cupboard, the armarium, often built into the thickness of the wall, next to the chapter house door, in the care of the precentor. Larger houses have a proper room. In some places the most consulted books are chained to their desks, which sounds severe and is in fact the medieval solution to the problem of making an expensive object publicly available rather than locking it away. And once a year, at the beginning of Lent, in the custom described in a number of monastic observances, the whole library is brought out and laid on a carpet in the chapter house. Every brother returns the book he was given the previous year. The list is read aloud. Any monk who has not read his book confesses it and asks pardon. And then each is given a new one for the coming year. It is an extraordinarily well-designed institution, and our herbalist has been given, this year, something he did not ask for and is enjoying more than he expected. Let us turn now to the interruption, because there is one most afternoons, and it comes from the far end of the Abbey. A boy has come from the gatehouse. There are people at the gate. We turn now to that gate, and to the man who keeps it. The rule sets out the porter's office with a particular warmth. A wise old monk is to be stationed at the gate of the monastery, one who knows how to receive a message and to give an answer, and whose age keeps him from wandering off. He is to have a room near the gate, so that anyone arriving always finds someone there. And when a caller knocks or a poor man cries out, he is to answer at once with the words "Thanks be to God," or ask a blessing. That is the tone the rule sets for every encounter between the Abbey and the world outside it, and the porter of our house, who is 71 and has done this for 2 decades, keeps it exactly. Beside the gate is the almonry. Whatever the community does not eat, and a set quantity of bread besides, goes out from here every day, distributed by the almoner to the poor of the district. Abbey account rolls record these doles in real numbers, and in the larger houses the count of people fed daily at the gate runs into the dozens, and on certain feast days into the hundreds. It is one of the principal social functions of a monastery, and in a bad harvest year, it is the difference between hunger and something worse for a considerable number of families. And where there is a daily gathering of the poor, there is illness. Let us turn now to who is waiting today, because it is a fairly ordinary afternoon. There is a woman from the village whose small son pulled a pot of boiling water over his forearm 2 days ago. There is a carter who has crushed a thumb between a wheel and a gatpost, and who does not want to lose the nail. There is an old tenant with an ulcer on his shin that our herbalist has been treating on and off for 4 years. That closes each summer and opens each winter, and that both of them understand is not going to be cured. And there is a man who has walked 11 miles because he heard that the monks have something for his wife's cough, and who is going to be given something and sent home, and about whose wife our herbalist can form no opinion at all, having never seen her. We turn now to what he can and cannot do about any of that, because there is law involved, and it is more interesting than it sounds. Across the 12th century, a series of church councils took an increasingly firm line on clergy and religious practicing medicine. The councils held at Clermont, and then at the Lateran, and later at Tours, addressed themselves to monks and canons regular who were leaving their cloisters to study law and medicine, and forbade it, and the language they used is quite specific. The concern was not healing. The concern was monks abandoning the enclosure, pursuing worldly business, and taking fees. Later legislation made clergy in major orders wary of surgery, of anything involving the knife and the cautery. The practical effect on a house like this one is a set of understood limits. The infirmary is for the brothers. The Abbey does not run a public practice. Nobody is charged, and anything requiring a blade waits for the barber. Within those limits, a very great deal still happens at that gate, because charity is not commerce, and everybody involved knows the difference. Let us turn now to how he actually handles the 4 people in front of him. The child's burn is the easiest and the most useful. He looks at it in the daylight, which is why this happens at the gate and not indoors. The skin has blistered, but the blisters are unbroken, which he takes as a good sign, and he does not open them. He gives the mother a small pot of a salve made from calendula and lily root in fat and wax. He tells her to keep it covered with clean linen and to change it daily, and he says the word clean twice. And he tells her to bring the boy back in 4 days, whether it looks better or worse, which is the single most valuable sentence he speaks all afternoon, because it converts one encounter into 2. The carter's thumb is bound and splinted to the neighboring finger with a strip of wood, and he is told plainly that the nail will very likely come off, and that this is not a disaster, and that a new one will grow. The old tenant gets what he always gets: a wash, a fresh dressing, comfrey and plantain, an instruction to keep the leg raised in the evenings that both of them know will not be followed because the man has to work, and a quarter of an hour of conversation that is arguably the treatment. And the man who walked 11 miles is given a linen bag of dried horehound and elecampane with instructions for making a decoction, and honey to put in it, and is told that if she is coughing blood or cannot lie flat, he should come back and say so directly to the porter. We turn now to what comes back through the gate in the other direction. They bring him things. A boy brings a basket of elderflower because he was told last year that it was wanted. A woman brings burdock root because she was paid for some once 3 years ago in bread. A shepherd who ranges further than anyone else in the parish brings him a plant he has never seen before, wrapped in a wet cloth, because he thought it might be of interest, and it is. This is how a monastic herb cupboard is actually filled. The garden supplies the cultivated plants and the tender ones, and the ones that must be reliably to hand. Everything wild, everything that grows in the wood, or the marsh, or the high pasture, comes in on the arms of people who live out there, in exchange for bread, for a dressing, for a bag of dried herb, or for nothing at all beyond being thanked properly. The Abbey has a wall around it. The wall is a great deal more porous than it looks. Let us turn now to a locked chest in another part of the Abbey entirely, and to the things in it that no amount of gardening will ever produce. The garden gives him a great deal. It does not give him pepper. It does not give him ginger, or cinnamon, or cloves, or nutmeg, or mace, or galingale, or zedoari, or cubi. It does not give him frankincense, or myrrh, or mastic, or gum arabic. It does not give him sugar, or rice, or dates, or figs, or almonds, though the last of those can sometimes be coaxed out of a sheltered southern wall in a good year, and never in quantity. And a surprising proportion of the recipes in the books he was reading half an hour ago call for exactly those things. So this afternoon, before Vespers, he goes to find the cellarer. We turn now to that office, because the rule describes it with unusual care and a certain amount of feeling. The cellarer is to be chosen from the community as a man who is sober, not a great eater, not proud, not excitable, not offensive, not slow, not wasteful, and who fears God, and who is like a father to the whole community. He is to give the brothers their allowance without arrogance and without delay, and if he has nothing to give, he is to answer kindly, because a good word is better than the best gift. And in one of the most quoted lines of the entire rule, he is to regard all the vessels and goods of the monastery as though they were the sacred vessels of the altar, and to consider nothing negligible. That is an extraordinary thing to say about a storeroom, and it explains a good deal about why medieval monasteries were, on the whole, so well run. The man in charge of the buckets was told that the buckets were holy. Let us turn now to the store itself. It is usually a vaulted undercroft, stone-floored, cool, dim, with small high windows, running beneath the western range of the cloister. Barrels of ale and wine, sacks of grain and flour and dried peas, barrels of salt fish and of salt beef for the infirmary, cheeses on racks, honey in sealed jars, salt which is itself expensive and carefully counted, wax, candles, cloth, iron, and at the far end, in a corner of it, a chest with a lock, and in that chest the spices. We turn now to how those spices reached a stone building in the wet north of Europe, because the journey is genuinely long. Pepper comes from the Malabar coast of southern India. Cinnamon comes from Ceylon. Cloves, nutmeg and mace come from a handful of small islands further east still, so remote that European traders of this period have no idea where they actually grow and will not find out for another 200 years. Ginger comes from India and further east. All of it moves by sea across the Indian Ocean to the Persian Gulf or the Red Sea, then overland by caravan, then to Alexandria or to the ports of the Levant, then by Venetian or Genoese ship across the Mediterranean, then north over the Alpine passes or up the Rhone into the great fairs of Champagne and Flanders, and from there by cart and pack horse to a market town near this abbey. Every stage of that has a merchant on it, and every merchant takes his portion. By the time a peppercorn reaches this cellar, it has been bought and sold perhaps a dozen times, and has travelled the better part of the known world. Let us turn now to what that means for the price. Pepper in this period is not the ordinary thing it later became, but nor is it the fabulous treasure of popular retelling. It is expensive, it is available, and it is reliable enough in value that it functions almost as a currency. Rents are recorded as payable in pounds of pepper. Debts are settled in it. Its price is stable enough that people trust it, the way they trust silver. Saffron is another matter entirely and is, weight for weight, among the most costly substances in medieval Europe, for the simple and unavoidable reason that it is the dried stigma of a crocus flower, and that it takes an appalling number of flowers, hand-picked at dawn, to make a single ounce. Sugar in his century is sold in small quantities by weight, and is classed as a medicine rather than as a food, and appears in the accounts alongside the drugs, and not the groceries. Abbey account rolls survive in numbers from the 13th century onward, and they are wonderfully plain reading. Pepper, so many pounds. Ginger, so many. Saffron, a few ounces. Almonds and rice for the infirmary. Sugar, purchased for the sick. Wax. These are real entries from real houses, and they tell us that a middling monastery bought these things regularly, in modest amounts, mostly for the kitchen of the sick and for the making of medicines. We turn now to the conversation between the two men, which is a negotiation and is conducted very politely. Our herbalist would like ginger, because ginger is warm and dry in the classification he works with, and because it is the standard thing to give an old man with a cold stomach in winter, and because the passage in the Barnwell observances that describes his office specifically names ginger among the things the infirmarian should have always ready. The cellarer would like to know how much he used last year, and whether it was all used, and whether there is any left, and what happened to the quantity bought the year before that. These are entirely fair questions, and our herbalist answers them, and this small exchange, repeated in every religious house in Europe several times a year, is the reason we have such good records. Somebody had to justify the spending, so somebody wrote it down, and 700 years later we can read what a monastery bought. Let us turn now to the greatest and most famous of the compound medicines, which this house owns a very small quantity of, and treats accordingly. Theriac was an antidote against poison and against almost everything else, inherited from antiquity, and by the medieval period it had grown into a compound of 60 or 70 ingredients, including opium, a long list of aromatics, and, notoriously, the flesh of vipers. It was made in a slow process, matured for years, and in the great commercial cities, its preparation became a public event, carried out in the open with the ingredients displayed and inspected by officials, precisely because everyone knew how easy it would be to cheat. It reached England and the North as an import, and appears in accounts and in wills, and it was expensive. An abbey of this size might hold a few ounces of it in a sealed jar, brought out for the gravest cases, and kept for years. Our herbalist has some. He has used it 4 times in 18 years. He is not certain, in his own mind, that it did anything on any of those occasions, and he is not a man given to saying so out loud. We turn now to the problem of knowing whether any of it is genuine. Adulteration was endemic, and everyone in the trade knew it. Ground pepper cut with anything of the right color. Saffron bulked out with safflower or marigold petals, or weighted with honey and oil to increase its weight an offence for which the penalties in some German cities were savage. Cinnamon substituted with cheaper barks, expensive gums extended with resin. The town's spicers and apothecaries were regulated for this reason, with guild oversight, sworn officers, and inspections, and the whole apparatus of medieval commercial regulation grew up around commodities exactly like these. Our herbalist defenses are the ordinary ones of a man who handles material every day. He buys whole rather than ground wherever he possibly can, because a whole peppercorn is hard to counterfeit and a bowl of grey powder is not. He smells everything. He breaks a piece and looks at the fresh surface. He tastes a very little, and he prefers on the whole. A slightly worse spice from a merchant his house has dealt with for 20 years to a better one from a stranger at a fair. Let us turn now to the quiet opinion he holds and rarely voices. He notices that the imported drugs are what get written about, and that the plants outside his own door are what he actually reaches for. He notices that a man with a cough is helped by horehound from the wall of his own garden, and that the elaborate electuary of 11 ingredients from the Southern Book, which costs a great deal and takes an afternoon to compound, does not obviously help him more. He would not put this in writing, and if he did, nobody would have copied it. But it sits behind the way he works, and it is the reason the shelf in his stillroom is mostly full of things that grew within a mile of it. We turn now to a message from the guest hall, which arrives while he is still in the cellar. Let us turn now to that building and to the obligation that governs it. The rule devotes a whole chapter to guests, and it is one of the most absolute passages in the entire text. All guests who arrive are to be received as Christ himself. The greatest care is to be shown to the poor and to pilgrims, because in them Christ is more particularly received, since the awe surrounding the rich secures respect enough for them on its own. The abbot is to pour water on the guests' hands, and the abbot with the whole community is to wash their feet. The rule also, characteristically, deals with the practical consequences. The abbot's kitchen and the guest's kitchen are to be separate from the communities, so that guests arriving at odd hours do not disturb the brothers. A brother whose soul is possessed by the fear of God is to be assigned charge of the guest house, and no monk is to associate or converse with a guest without permission. So a monastery of any size has a guest hall, sometimes two, one for those of rank with their servants and horses, and a plainer one for the poor and for wayfarers, both of them out in the outer court, beyond the enclosure proper, near the stables and the gate. We turn now to who is in it tonight. There is a wool merchant travelling with 2 men and 8 horses, who will be gone before prime. There is a messenger carrying letters to a bishop. There is a family of 4 on their way to a shrine 3 days further west. And there is a man asleep in the corner of the poor hall, who has walked from somewhere in the east country, and who has been asleep since noon, and who is the reason our herbalist has been sent for. Let us turn now to what walking does to a body, because the guest hall of a medieval abbey is, among other things, a clinic for feet. Long-distance travel in this world is done on foot by the great majority of people, in shoes of thin leather with no support and no waterproofing whatever, over roads that are mud in winter and rutted stone in summer, carrying a pack. The results are blisters that have burst and become infected, nails lost, chilblains in the cold months, and in the worst cases ulcers on the heel or the ball of the foot that have been walked on for a week and will not close. The treatment is old and simple and largely correct. The feet are washed thoroughly in warm water. Dead skin is trimmed. Anything obviously foul is bathed with wine. A salve of comfrey and calendula goes on. Clean cloth and rest, which is the ingredient the patient always argues about, because he has somewhere to be. Our herbalist has done this several hundred times and has learned to argue back gently and to lose gracefully. Most of them go on the next morning regardless. We turn now to the sleeping man and to the thing that actually worries him. It is not the feet. The man has a flux and has had it for 3 days, and this is the illness that our herbalist takes more seriously than almost any other, because it moves. He does what his tradition tells him to do, and what a modern reader will recognize as approximately right for the wrong reasons. He gets fluid into the man, thin barley water, small amounts often, and he insists on it repeatedly and irritatingly for the rest of the evening. He gives a decoction of astringent plants, bramble leaf and tormentil root and bistort and agrimony, all of which are genuinely astringent and all of which grow within a short walk. He gives nothing heavy to eat, and he moves him, not far and not unkindly, but out of the corner of the crowded poor hall, and into a small separate chamber, with a bed and a pot and a door. His reasoning is framed entirely in terms of corrupted air and the danger of a foul vapor spreading among the other guests. His action is isolation, and it is the correct one, and the fact that the theory underneath it is wrong does not make the practice any less useful. Let us turn now to the other thing that arrives with travelers, which nobody in the guest hall wishes to discuss, and which everybody has. Lice, fleas, and the itch travel as reliably as news does, and a hall full of people sleeping in their clothes on straw is exactly the arrangement that suits them best. The Abbey does not pretend otherwise. There is a laundry run under the chamberlain, where clothing and bedding are boiled, and boiling is the single most effective measure available, and was practiced long before anyone could say why it worked. For the body itself there are the old remedies, and they are older than the Abbey by a very long way. The classical treatment for lice was the seed of stavesacre, ground and made into an ointment or a wash, and it appears in Dioscorides and in every herbal descended from him, and was still being sold for exactly this purpose in the 19th century, which tells you it did something. There is sulfur worked into fat for the itch, and this too is genuinely effective and is still the basis of a treatment used today in parts of the world. There is soapwort, which grows in a corner of the garden, and whose leaves and root make a lather in water. One of the very few plants in Northern Europe that will do so, and which the laundry uses on the finer cloth. And there is the calm and patience and the willingness to sit outside in the daylight with somebody's head in your hands, which is the most reliable method of all, and always has been. The brothers themselves are not exempt from any of this. Monastic bathing was infrequent by our standards, restricted by custom, and regarded with a certain suspicion as a comfort, though the rule specifically permits it to the sick as often as it is useful. The head was shaved regularly, which helped. The hall floors were strewn with wormwood and tansy, which we will come back to this evening, and which were there precisely for this reason. We turn now to a part of the Abbey's population we have not yet counted, and which is also his responsibility. It is easy to picture a monastery as 40 monks and nobody else. It was nothing of the kind. A house of 40 choir monks might have 100 or more people attached to it, living on the site or nearby and working for it. Ploughmen and shepherds and cowards, a smith and his boy, a baker and a brewer, carpenters, masons where building is going on, which in a large abbey is nearly always, kitchen servants, laundry women, stable hands, the porter's assistants, the gardener and his labourers. In houses with lay brothers, a whole second community of them with their own quarters and their own timetable. There are also, in many abbeys, Corodians, people who have paid a lump sum or given land in exchange for board and lodging in the precinct for the rest of their lives. An arrangement that functioned as a private pension and that abbots regularly regretted agreeing to, because Corodians had an inconvenient habit of living far longer than the calculation assumed. All of these people get hurt, and when they do, they come to him. Let us turn now to the injuries of that household, which are the injuries of any working farm and workshop in any century. Burns from the bakehouse oven on the forearms, almost always on the same part of the same arm. Scalds from the brewhouse, which are worse, because a copper of near boiling wort tipping over does not burn a hand, it burns a leg and a foot inside a shoe. Crushed toes from barrels and from cattle. Cuts from the reaping hook in August, which arrive in a rush of 3 or 4 in a single week, and then not at all. Hernias in men who lift for a living, for which he can offer a truss and advice that will be ignored. Backs, eyes from the forge, where a fragment of hot scale has gone in and must be got out at once with the corner of a clean cloth and a great deal of steadiness. And the coughs of the men who thresh every winter in a barn full of dust. He treats all of them without question and without payment, and he does not regard it as a separate part of his work from tending the brothers. The Abbey is a body. Some of it wears a habit, and some of it does not. We turn now to what he gets from these people in return, which is more valuable than they know. He asks them questions. Where have you come from? Which road? Was there sickness in the towns you passed? Were the wells low? Did you see many buried? Travellers are the only news service he has. A guest hall on a main road receives, over a season, a continuous stream of low-grade intelligence about the health of an entire region. And an infirmarian who is paying attention can hear an epidemic coming several weeks before it arrives at his own gate. Monastic chronicles are full of exactly this kind of information, recorded because somebody at the Abbey heard it from somebody passing through, and it is one of the reasons those chronicles are so useful to historians of disease. Tonight the news is dull, which is the best kind. A wet spring in the east. Poor hay. Nothing worse than the usual autumn fevers anywhere along the road. He takes it, and he is glad of it, and the bell goes for Vespers. Let us turn now to Vespers, which is sung as the light goes, and which is for many people the most beautiful office of the day. It is longer than the little hours and shorter than the night office. It has psalms, a hymn, a reading, and at its center the great evening canticle. And on feast days the altar is censed, and the whole church fills with smoke that catches the last of the light coming in low through the western windows. In its origins it is the lamp lighting office, sung at the hour when the lamps of a household were kindled, and although the theology moved on the name of that older thing stayed attached to it. Our herbalist comes in from the guest hall with his sleeves damp and stands in his place and sings. We turn now to something that connects this office directly to his garden, and that most modern accounts of monastic herbalism leave out entirely. The church is one of his largest customers. Let us turn now to the wax, and to the bees we left humming against the south wall this morning. An Abbey church consumes an extraordinary quantity of candles. There are lights before the high altar, lights before the side altars, lights before images and relics, lights for the choir so the community can see the books it does not sing from, lights carried in procession, lights burning perpetually in memory of benefactors who paid for them in their wills and whose descendants will complain if they go out. And the church will not use tallow on the altar. Tallow is rendered animal fat. It is cheap, it smokes and it smells, and it is what the kitchen and the workshops and the lantern at the gate burn. The altar takes beeswax, pure, and this was a matter of both practice and belief, because wax was understood as something produced by a creature that labored without harming what it touched, and it burned clean and sweetly. The Easter liturgy contains a long-sung proclamation before the great paschal candle in which the labor of bees is praised by name, and that candle in a substantial abbey is an object of real size. Weighing many pounds, its weight recorded year after year in the sacrist's accounts, so the skeps in the wall are not a sideline. Honey goes to the infirmary and the kitchen. Wax goes to the church, and the sacrist and the infirmarian have, between them, a standing and entirely amicable disagreement about the proportions, which is settled in chapter about once every 3 years, and then quietly drifts again. We turn now to the incense, which comes from very much further away. Frankincense and myrrh are the hardened resins of trees that grow in southern Arabia and across the water on the African coast. Tapped by cutting the bark and letting the sap bleed and harden into tears. They have been traded north for at least 3,000 years, and the route by which they reach this abbey is the same route the pepper came by, with the same merchants and the same number of hands. They arrive as lumps of pale gold and reddish-brown resin, and the sacrist keeps them locked with the same care the cellarer keeps the spices. They go on to burning charcoal in a swinging vessel, and the smoke is heavy and resinous and slightly citrus, and unlike anything else in the building. And they are also, in his books, medicines. Frankincense appears in plasters and in preparations for wounds and for the chest. Myrrh appears in mouthwashes and in dressings, and its genuine antiseptic properties were noticed empirically long before anyone could explain them. The line between the sacristy cupboard and the stillroom shelf is, in a medieval abbey, a good deal thinner than we tend to imagine. Let us turn now to the floor. The church, the chapter house, the guest hall and the infirmary all have hard floors of stone or tile, and in the medieval fashion they are strewn. Rushes are cut from the wet ground, dried and spread, and among them are laid handfuls of sweet-smelling herbs, and the whole layer is renewed periodically and swept out entirely a few times a year. What went into the strewing is a genuinely charming list, and every item on it comes out of ground our herbalist is responsible for. meadowsweet above all, which was the great strewing herb of England, and whose old name means precisely the herb strewn in the mead hall, sweet and almond-scented when it is crushed underfoot. Sweet flag, where it could be got, whose leaves smell of tangerine when they are bruised. Ladies' bedstraw, which dries with the smell of new-mown hay. Tansy and wormwood, which are not there to smell pleasant, but to discourage fleas. Lavender and rosemary in the south. Chamomile, which releases its scent most strongly when it is trodden on, and which was for that reason planted in walked-on paths, as well as strewn indoors. The effect of all this, in a building holding 40 men in wool habits and a great many candles, is not a perfume. It is a countermeasure. But on the day the rushes are changed, in a church full of crushed meadowsweet, it must have been remarkable. Let us turn now to the greenery of the year, because the church wanted living plants as well as dried ones, and it wanted them on particular days. On the Sunday before Easter, branches are carried in procession. In the Mediterranean, these are palms. North of the Alps, where no palm grows, the custom substituted whatever was green and available. And so the day is kept with box, with willow catkins, with yew, and in some regions the local name of the day names the substitute rather than the palm. Those branches are blessed, carried, and afterwards taken home, kept behind a door or above a bed until the following year, and in many places burned to ashes for the following spring. At Whitsun the floors are strewn with birch, and with rushes and with flowers. At the midsummer feasts the fires are lit, and the herbs are gathered. In midwinter the church and the hall are dressed with holly and ivy, and whatever else holds its leaf, and the choice is not sentimental. It is simply that in December in northern Europe there is very little else. And on the great processions of the summer, the way is strewn with flowers and with sweet herbs by children walking ahead, which means somebody has to have grown them and cut them and had them ready in baskets on the right morning. That somebody is our herbalist, and one of the standing minor irritations of his year is that the sacrist's flower requirements and the infirmary's medicine requirements fall on precisely the same beds, in precisely the same fortnight. We turn now to a feast in the middle of August, and to a custom that gathers up everything we have been describing today into a single morning. On the Feast of the Assumption, across a wide stretch of medieval Europe, and particularly in the German lands, bundles of herbs were brought into the church and blessed. The custom is well documented. It persisted for centuries, and in some regions it persists still. The bundles were tied to a fixed pattern, a set number of plants, with variations from valley to valley. And after the blessing they were taken home and hung in the house, laid in with the linen, put in the byre, burned on the hearth in a storm, or steeped and given to a sick animal or a sick child through the coming year. For a monastic herbalist this was, in the most literal sense, his working year presented at the altar. He grew them, he cut them, he tied them, he watched them blessed, and he gave them out. Whatever anyone believes about what the blessing did, the practical effect is not in doubt. Once a year, in a public ceremony that everybody attended, a whole district was reminded which plants mattered, was given a set of them, and was told how to use them. Let us turn now to a small vessel kept in the church that is not a medicine, and that he will need before this day is over. 3 oils are consecrated by the bishop once a year in the cathedral on the Thursday of Holy Week, and are distributed from there to the churches and religious houses of the diocese, where they are kept in small stoppered vessels, often locked in a wall recess called an ombry. 1 is for baptism, 1 is chrism for the greatest of the sacraments, and 1 is the oil of the sick. It is olive oil and nothing else, and it is not the ingredient. The anointing of the sick is a sacrament of the Church, given to those who are gravely ill, on the forehead and the hands, with a prayer. It was, by his century, closely associated with dying, so much so that many people put off asking for it out of an entirely human reluctance to admit what was happening. Our herbalist has learned to raise the subject earlier than most infirmarians, and gently, and he has learned that he is nearly always right to. We turn now, as the light goes, to the honest reckoning of what he cannot do. Let us turn to it plainly, because a night spent describing what medieval medicine achieved without describing what it could not would be a kind of dishonesty, and because he was under no illusions at all. The first category is epidemic disease, and it is the one that frightens him. Fevers that move through a district, that take the strong as readily as the weak, that arrive from a road or a river and are gone in 8 weeks, having emptied a village, he can nurse. He can isolate, after a fashion, on the reasoning available to him. He can keep water and food going into people, and keep them warm. He has no way of stopping it, and he knows it, and the entries in monastic chronicles about such years are among the flattest and most frightening writing of the period, because they are so short. So many died. The harvest was not brought in. Among these there is one that deserves naming, because it took a form nobody at the time could account for, and that we can now explain completely. In damp years, rye in the field could be infected with a fungus, and bread made from that grain caused an illness of burning pain in the limbs, of gangrene, of convulsions, and of visions. It was called the fire, and later Saint Anthony's fire, and a whole religious order arose to care for its sufferers with hospitals across France and beyond. The one treatment that reliably worked was to take the sufferer away from home and feed him bread made from other grain, which the hospitals did without ever knowing that this, and not the journey or the shrine, was the cure. Let us turn now to the second category, which the Abbey met at its own gate. Leprosy was diagnosed by inspection, by a panel of men who were often not physicians, and the diagnosis carried consequences that fell on the whole of a person's life. Those judged leprous were separated, and in many places the separation was marked with a formal ceremony in church that used the words of the burial rite. They lived in houses set outside the walls of towns and abbeys, supported by charity, by the abbey's own alms, and by the coins of passers-by, and they carried a clapper or a bell. Modern study of skeletons from these cemeteries has shown that a substantial proportion of the people confined were not suffering from that disease at all, but from some other disfiguring skin condition. And it has also shown, more gently, that many of those houses fed and sheltered their inmates decently for years, and that they were not simply places to be discarded. Our herbalist's own house maintains a small hospital of this kind at the edge of its lands, and the almoner deals with it, and he visits it 4 times a year and takes salves and clean linen, and comes back subdued, We turn now to the third category, which is quieter and which he meets far more often. There are illnesses inside the body that he cannot see. A swelling that grows steadily in a man's abdomen over 18 months. A cough that never resolves and that ends in blood. A yellowing of the skin that comes on slowly and does not go. He has names for these from his books, and the names describe the appearance rather than the cause, and none of them helps. What he does for these is what good practitioners have always done when they cannot cure. He treats the symptom that troubles the person most. He manages pain cautiously with what he has. He keeps the bowels comfortable and the mouth moist and the skin clean. He tells the truth when he is asked, and he has learned to answer the actual question rather than the one that was spoken. Let us turn now to a fourth thing, which arrives once a year on horseback with a roll of instruments, and which he watches and does not touch. Stone in the bladder was one of the great afflictions of the medieval world, far commoner than it is now, and its sufferers are unmistakable. A man who cannot pass water without agony, who is bent over, who has not slept properly in weeks, and who will eventually say to anybody who will listen that he would rather be cut than go on. And there were men who cut. Traveling operators, working a circuit of towns and religious houses, carrying their own instruments, doing one operation and doing it a great many times. The procedure was ancient, described in Greek and in Arabic surgical writing, and it was performed without anything we would recognize as anesthesia beyond a draught of something strong and the strength of the assistants holding the patient. It was quick because it had to be, and the best of these men were startlingly fast. A proportion of patients died. Proportion recovered completely and were free of a torment that had ruled their lives for years. And those men told everybody, which is precisely why the operators kept being sent for. The same circuit brought men who couched cataracts with a needle, pushing the clouded lens down out of the line of sight, restoring a blurred and partial vision to people who had had none, and men who dealt with hernias. The Abbey's part in all this is limited and clear. It gives the operator a bed and a meal. It provides the room, the light, the boiled cloth, the assistance, and afterwards the nursing, which lasts far longer than the operation and which is entirely the infirmarian's. Our herbalist holds the man's hands. He does not hold the knife, and by the law of his church and the custom of his house he never will. And on the whole he is at peace with that. And the fifth category is the mind. Melancholy, in the framework he uses, is an excess of black bile, and there are herbs and diets prescribed for it in every book he owns. He has used them. He has not seen them do much. What he has seen do something, and what monastic communities were unusually well placed to provide, is a regular hour to get up, a task that has to be done whether or not one feels like doing it, other people in the same room, food at fixed times, and somebody who notices if you do not come down. That is not a cure, and he would not call it one, but there are brothers in this house who are alive and functioning who might not be, and the reason is a timetable. Let us turn now to what happens when none of it is enough, because the customs around dying in a monastery are precise and were designed with great care. When a brother is judged to be near the end, the community is called. In many houses a wooden board is struck, a sound quite different from the bell, and Every monk in the abbey stops what he is doing and comes. From the fields, from the kitchen, from the scriptorium, he is anointed. The Passion is read aloud beside him. In the older customs of some houses, he is lifted from the bed and laid on a cloth of sackcloth strewn with ashes on the floor, in a gesture of humility that reads as harsh to us and was understood as the opposite, a return to the ground. The brothers stand around him and say the creed and the psalms, and they stay in relays so that he is not alone at any moment. And when it is over, his name goes into the book of the house, and it is read out in chapter on that day every year afterwards, for as long as the abbey stands, alongside names 2 centuries older than his. We turn now, briefly, to what our herbalist does with all of this. He is present at nearly every one of them. It is his room and his work, and by the time a brother reaches that afternoon, our man has usually known for weeks. He has washed him and turned him and fed him and sat with him and answered his questions. He does not, so far as anyone can tell, become hardened by it, nor does he speak about it much. What he does on the evening after a brother dies is go out into the herb garden in the dark and stand there for a while with his hands behind his back, looking at nothing in particular, and then come in and go to bed. Tonight nobody has died. The old man in the 4th bed is still there and will be tomorrow and possibly for months. The light has gone almost entirely out of the sky, and there is one more room he wants to look at before Compline. Let us turn now, with a lamp, down 5 stone steps into the coolest room in the abbey. The drying loft we visited this afternoon holds the raw material, hanging in bundles in the warm air above the chimney of the warming house. The herb cellar holds what he has made from it, and the 2 rooms want opposite things. The loft must be warm and dry and moving. The cellar must be cool, dark, and utterly still. It is a small vaulted undercroft with a stone floor, and no window worth the name, only a narrow slit high in the wall for air, and it holds its temperature within a few degrees from January to August without anyone doing anything about it at all. Every abbey had a room like this somewhere, because every abbey needed one for its aisle and its cheese, and the herbalist's corner of it is simply an extension of the same practical wisdom. We turn now to what is on those shelves, jar by jar, because this is the working pharmacy of the house, and its contents are the whole of today's labor, turned into something that lasts. There are the syrups, in stoneware jars with cloth tied over the mouths, and a layer of wax cloth beneath the cloth, the poppy syrup, and the rose syrup, and the syrup of horehound, and the syrup of violets. All of them dark and heavy and sweet enough to keep for the better part of a year. There are the oils, in earthenware with a piece of bladder stretched and tied over the top, the calendula, the St. John's wort standing red as wine, where the flowers have given up their colour, the comfrey. There is a wide crock of the salve he used on the leg this morning, and beside it 3 smaller pots of the same thing made up for carrying out to the gate. There is the vinegar, and there is the oxymel, and there is a great sealed jar of honey from the skeps, which is both a medicine and the carrier for a dozen others. There is a rack of small stoppered flasks, holding the waters, rose and elderflower and fennel, made in the alembic that stands unused for most of the year and is brought out for a week in June. There are the electuaries, thick and dark in their pots, and there is a small locked box high up, with the poppy and the henbane and the mandrake and the theriac in it. And the key to that box is not the key at his belt, but a second one that lives in the abbot's keeping. Let us turn now to the reason he comes down here at the end of the day rather than the beginning. He is taking stock. He walks the shelf slowly with the lamp held low and looks at levels. The horehound syrup is more than half gone, and the autumn coughs have not started yet, which means a morning at the stillroom bench this week. The calendula salve is fine. The rose water is nearly finished, and will not be made again until next June, so from tomorrow it is for the infirmary only, and not for the guest hall. The oxymel is plentiful. The bramble and tormentil decoction he made this evening for the man in the guest house is standing in a covered pan and must be used tomorrow or thrown away, because decoctions do not keep, and he has never once been tempted to pretend otherwise. He does not write any of this down, he carries it. And when he wakes in the dark in 5 hours' time, standing in choir singing psalms he could sing in his sleep, this list is what will be quietly running underneath the words. We turn now to a sound in the corner, which is why the door is left ajar. The cellar has mice, as every store in every stone building in Europe has mice, and mice in a herb cellar are not a nuisance but a genuine loss, because they will go through a linen bag of seed in a night and foul 3 times what they eat. Traps exist and are used, but the real answer walks in on its own and has been walking in on its own for a very long time. Let us turn now to the Abbey cat, who is not an accident and not a pet, or not officially. Cats were kept in monasteries throughout the medieval period for the entirely unsentimental reason that they worked, and the evidence for it is scattered through account rolls, customaries, and inventories in the driest possible language. The English guide written for anchoresses in the 13th century, when it comes to the question of animals, allows its readers to keep no beast except a cat, and the reason is understood to be so obvious that it is not explained. And there survives, from the 9th century, in the margin of a manuscript kept at Rykennel, a short poem in Old Irish written by a monk far from home about his white cat. He compares the cat's work to his own. The cat hunts mice, and he hunts words, and each of them is contented and skillful in his own art. And each of them sits up at night at his task, and neither disturbs the other. It is one of the earliest and warmest pieces of writing about an animal in any European language, and it was written in the margin of somebody else's book by a man who was supposed to be doing something else. We turn now to the practical management of such an animal, about which our herbalist has a firm opinion. She gets milk in the morning, and whatever the infirmary kitchen has that is not fit for anyone else. She does not get more than that. A cat fed to satisfaction is a cat asleep on the warm flagstones by the chimney, and a cat asleep by the chimney is of no use whatever to a room full of seed jars. She is, on the other hand, extremely welcome in the infirmary, where she has established over several years the habit of sitting on the beds of whichever brother is least able to move, and where our herbalist, who would never in his life describe this as treatment, has entirely stopped shooing her off. Let us turn now to the last round of the evening, which is short. He closes the shutters he opened this morning, one after another down the length of the hall. He banks the fire so that it will hold until dawn without being fed. He looks at the leg and does not touch the dressing, because he changed it this morning, and a wound that is left alone heals faster than one that is admired twice a day. The young monk whose fever broke is sitting up and has eaten. The man with the tooth has woken and can speak and has asked for something to drink, which is a considerable improvement on this morning. The bled brother has finished the chamomile heads and is pleased with himself. And the old man is awake and clear and asks what hour it is and is told, and asks again a minute later and is told again in exactly the same tone. He relieves the day attendant and greets the night one. He checks that there is a lantern with a candle in it standing ready by the door, and that the candle in it is a long one, because the instruction he was given when he took this office was that the infirmarian must always have a candle and a lantern ready in case a brother should be dying in the night, and he has never yet failed to check. And then the bell goes for the last time today. We turn now to Compline and to the way a monastic day is closed. Before it, in many houses, the community gathers for a short reading. It is often taken from the conferences of the Desert Fathers, written down by Cassian. And because those books were called collations, the reading itself took that name. And because a small drink was served alongside it in some houses, the word slid sideways into ordinary language and came to mean a light meal. That is the whole etymology of a word most people use without ever wondering where it came from. And it comes from monks sitting in a cloister at nightfall listening to somebody read. Then, Compline itself, which is the shortest and simplest office of the day and the one every monk loves, it does not change. The other offices move with the season and the feast and the day of the week, and Compline, in the arrangement most houses followed, is the same every single night of the year, the same few psalms, the same hymn asking the Creator of all things for protection through the coming night and for rest from bad dreams, the same short reading, the same prayer, because it never changes. It is sung entirely from memory, which means it can be sung in a church with almost no light in it, which is exactly what happens. The candles are few. The high windows are black. 40 men who have been awake since 2 in the morning sing the same words they sang last night and the night before that. And every night since they were 15 years old. Let us turn now to the 2 small ceremonies at the end of it. The abbot, or the prior, takes a sprinkler and passes along the ranks of the brothers, and each of them is sprinkled with holy water as he goes out. It takes perhaps a minute, and it is done in silence, and it is the last thing that physically happens to a monk before he goes to bed. And in a good many houses of this period, there is one thing more. At the very end, the community sings an antiphon to the Virgin, and by the 13th century, this had become in several orders a small procession with candles, sung in the dark at the close of the day. It is the last music in the building for 6 hours. We turn now to the silence that follows, which is the strictest rule in the house. From the end of Compline until after the morning office the following day, there is no speaking at all. Not a word, not for any ordinary purpose, not to anyone, not by the abbot. It is called the Great Silence, and it is one of the very few provisions of monastic life that has survived essentially unaltered from the 6th century into houses that keep it today. If something must be communicated, it is communicated by sign. If somebody is dying, the silence is broken, and that is very nearly the only thing that breaks it. So our herbalist goes up the night stair, without speaking to anyone. He passes the lamp burning on its bracket, the one he saw first thing this morning and will see first thing tomorrow. He takes off his shoes and lies down on the straw in his habit, girded, without a knife at his belt, in a room with 40 other men in it. And the whole building goes quiet in stages, the way an old building does, with a cough here and a shifting board there, and then nothing. We turn now to the brothers who lie awake in it, because there are always one or two, and because they are his as well. A man who cannot sleep in a monastery has a harder time of it than a man who cannot sleep anywhere else, because he cannot get up and light a candle, and he cannot go and find someone to talk to. And he knows that the bell will go in the middle of the night regardless of whether he has slept a minute. Our herbalist has a small set of answers, and he is honest about their limits. There is a warm drink at the collation, milk or thin ale with a little honey, given to a brother he knows is struggling, without saying anything about why. There is lettuce, which the classical writers held to be cooling and sleep-bringing, and which appears in remedy after remedy for wakefulness right through the medieval period. There is valerian root, which smells frankly unpleasant, and which he gives in small quantity in wine. There are hops, which are only just becoming familiar in his part of Europe, and which he is watching with interest. There is chamomile always. There is a pillow stuffed with dried hops and ladies' bedstraw for a brother who has asked for anything at all. And there is the advice he gives most often, which costs nothing and is not written in any of his books. Do not lie there counting the hours. Say the psalms you know in your head, slowly, and do not try to reach the end of them. Let us turn now to the accounting of the day, which we can do for him, because he never willed. He rose in the dark and sang for an hour and a half. He visited 5 sick men before dawn and eased a toothache. He sang 3 more offices, sat through a business meeting, made 3 requests and won 2 of them. He dressed a wound, turned an old man, opened a room's worth of shutters, weeded 3 beds, watered 2, and stood near his bees. He ate 1 meal in silence. He hung and turned drying herbs and thought about mood. He compounded nothing today, but planned 4 things. He organized a bleeding, oversaw it, argued about the rest days afterwards, and lost part of that argument. He wrote a page and a half. He treated 4 people at the gate for nothing and was given a basket of elderflower. He argued about ginger. He washed a stranger's feet and got fluid into a man with the flux and moved him into a room of his own. He sang 2 more offices. He checked a cellar, fed a cat, banked a fire, and made sure there was a candle ready in case somebody died. And by any measure that his century or ours would recognize, nothing happened today. We turn now to the last thought of the night, which widens out a little. There is nothing exceptional about this man. That is the entire point of him. He is one of several thousand brothers holding the same obedience in houses scattered from Ireland to Poland and from Norway to Sicily, doing very nearly the same things in very nearly the same order, on the same day in the same weather. Almost none of them are named in any surviving document. What survives instead is the shape of the buildings they worked in, the account rolls of the things they bought, the customaries that told them how to behave, and the plants. Botanists have long noticed something rather touching about the ground around ruined abbeys. Certain plants turn up there again and again, far outside their natural range, growing on old walls and in the grass over vanished garden beds. Alexander's, elecampane, soapwort, comfrey, feverfew, and a scattering of others, still holding their ground on sites where the roofs came off 400 or 500 years ago. Nobody planted them there recently. They are the descendants of a Physic garden, and they simply never left. That is the memorial, not a name. A patch of elecampane on a bank in a field where a wall used to be. He does not know this and would not have cared much for the idea. He is asleep. In a little under 5 hours, a brother with a lantern will come along the dormitory ringing a small bell, and he will get up and do all of it again. We have wandered a long way tonight, through a stone church in the dark, and a garden at first light, through an infirmary hall, and a drying loft, and a stillroom bench, along a bleeding calendar, and a copying desk, and a gate full of strangers, into a cellar and out again, and finally back to the same lamp burning on the same bracket where we began. If your eyes close somewhere along the way, that was always exactly the point of the evening, and there is nothing at all to have missed. There is nothing left to remember, and nothing left to do. The shutters are closed, the fire is banked low, the jars are stoppered and the bundles are hanging still in the dark of the loft, and somewhere below them a cat is working quietly and taking her time about it. It was, from beginning to end, an entirely ordinary day. He rose, and he sang, and he tended what needed tending, and he came back to the same lamp he had left. That is all it was, and it was enough, and there were 11,000 more of them. Let the day fall away from you now, the way his has fallen away from him. Let your shoulders drop, and your jaw, and your hands. Let the weight of you settle into whatever is holding you up. There is nothing being asked of you tonight, and nothing waiting for you until morning. And the morning is a very long way off. If you are still awake, you need not stay so. Let the words go on without you. Let the garden and the loft and the cellar and the long stone passages between them fade gently out, the way a room fades when the last candle in it is carried away. Sleep well. The quiet apothecary will be back soon with another quiet chapter. The last of the light is gone from the high windows. The stone is cool, and the silence has settled over the whole house, and the small flame on its bracket burns steadily on, keeping watch over 40 sleeping men until the bell. Good night.